Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here as always to talk about stuff this week on the show. We're going to do some news, we're going to talk some gaming stuff. I got the Super NES Classic, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And the process of getting it, which is a story in and of itself. But our main topic today is one that, I kid you not, I have been wanting to do since we launched this damn thing. And that is a Blade Runner retrospective topic.
Yeah.
Where we will talk about the classic 1982 movie Blade Runner by Ridley Scott, which is one of my favorite movies ever.
It's an unbelievably good movie, yeah.
And it's got a sequel coming out that looks unbelievably good.
Yeah, like the reviews have been very good.
Yeah, and like the most exciting thing to me about Blade Runner 2049 is everyone saying, like the original, this is an art film that probably won't play well to the masses. And I'm like, yes,
good.
That's what Blade Runner is. So I am so psyched for that. We'll get to talk about that next week. But this week we're going to talk about the original. And Sean, you even erected a little Blade Runner shrine for us.
Yes.
Here on the set.
Yeah, in honor of doing the Blade Runner retrospective, and in my remembering and having to dig out my Blade Runner DVD was, oh, right, I got, when they did in like 2007 or whenever, when they did the final cut version of the movie, they did all these big sort of home video releases, and I got a DVD version, because I think it was like right around my birthday, so I think I got it as a birthday present. And it has like it's in the briefcase, the Blade Runner briefcase, and it has all 5 versions of the movie, the 2 different theatrical versions, the director's cut version, the final cut version, and then the work print version. It has like a bunch of bonus features and all this like cool memorabilia stuff. And I was like, I have so much Blade Runner stuff just in here. I can basically do what we did for our Persona 5 podcast, which is just take all this weird shit I have and construct a little shrine out of it so that we can stare at Blade Runner in kind of its entirety while we talk about Blade Runner.
It's, it's silly, but it honestly, like with Persona 5, it made a difference. It helps.
It gets you in the mood. It really does.
And you look at it and like I'll see a picture of, oh, there's the weird guy who makes the eyeballs on the side of the DVD case. We can talk about him.
Yep, we can talk about Rutger Hauer. I've got him right there in front of me.
I don't think we'd be at risk of forgetting Rutger Hauer.
No.
But it's a good reminder, because there's no shot of the movie where he doesn't look cool.
That's true.
Even when he's piercing a nail through his hand.
Yeah.
Spoilers if you haven't seen it. All right. So, I guess I should say, if you haven't seen Blade Runner, you should just go see it and then listen to our podcast. Yeah. But let's see. We have lots of stuff to get to before then. So, Sean, why don't we start with some stuff? I want to start... I want to do a quick note of housekeeping, which is that as this is coming out, our second Doctor Who bonus podcast is launching for the public in the podcast feed. So if you didn't see it this morning when you downloaded this episode, it's in the feed. It's number 2. And we talked about the Patrick Troughton story, Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yep.
And a good time was had by all. And we're looking forward to the third Doctor episode we're going to do later this month.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's my first piece of stuff, which is I've been having fun doing Doctor Who classic stuff. And I love Jon Pertwee.
He's amazing.
He might be my favorite of the classic Doctors. No disrespect to any others.
No, yeah.
It's just, I love Jon Pertwee. And I love the weird, like, era of his stories where they went in it's like one of the most different eras of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I've seen I've seen more of his serials than I think the other classic Doctors, but I wanted, because the one you've picked for us to watch, the Demons, is relatively early in his run. It's the end of his second season. I thought, I'll just watch through from Spearhead to Space to that.
Okay,
and
great,
get a good feeling. Because I also know that the Demons is at the end of a season where the Master is in all the serials.
Exactly, yeah.
And I want to get a feel for it. So I've been doing that, and part of this was also that Spearhead from Space, the first Jon Pertwee serial, a couple of years ago, I think it was actually for the 50th anniversary, got a Blu-ray release, because that's the only classic or, frankly, modern Doctor Who story shot on film. It was shot on 16mm film and looks conspicuously better than all other episodes of Doctor Who. And so they did a big restoration and put it out on Blu-ray, and I just noticed on Amazon that it was like down to a good sale price. So I picked that up and kicked off my rewatch that way. And I just want to say one note about that. If you have any love for classic Who, if you have any love for Spearhead from Space, which you should because it's just one of the best Doctor Who stories.
It's really good.
Get that Blu-ray. It's fucking amazing. Have you seen that, Sean?
No, I haven't.
God, I'll have to lend it to you or something because it is unbelievable how good it looks. It's clearly 16mm film, so, you have to know what that looks like to like it, but I love 16mm, very grainy, but also textured, such rich colors. Most of Spearhead from Space is outside, it's not on sets.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool just to have 1970, London, English countryside preserved on this pristine 16mm. That's just like a little historical archive right there. But then also, it is so weird to watch classic Doctor Who, and it's not fuzzy, and it's not jittery, and it just looks like a movie from the period, maybe a low budget one, but a really good 16mm movie. And the restoration they did for that Blu-ray is top notch, outstanding.
I mean, it just sort of give a reference point for people who maybe aren't super familiar with classic Doctor Who, because we talked about this on the Tomb of the Cybermen episode, is because I assume you went from the previous
yes, I did.
The classic Doctor Who thing you watched was Tomb of the Cybermen, so you went from watching something that we only have because we found someone that recorded it secondhand by filming it from their fucking TV that has been painstakingly restored through a lot of processes that took basically a year to do, and just we had to make this presentable in the slightest. You went from that to proper film that has been restored and dressed up for a Blu-ray.
And it's a great reminder of why film is great, because no matter what the conditions, if you have a piece of film and it's not decayed to the point that you can't run it through something, you can restore it, and it can look great. And they even have a little restoration demo on the disc of how they did it, because it's a really good filmic presentation where sometimes they will go to the edges of the frame on the restoration just to make sure you see everything. And it's really nice, and it's just if you're a classic Doctor Who fan, you especially, Sean, you would get a kick out of it, because it's even if Spirit from Space in normal version still looks better than other serials, but this is a whole different level, and it's really cool, and it's just good God, that's a good story.
It's one of the best.
Because I'm also actually simultaneously starting my rewatch of the Stephen Moffat years. I'm doing that with my brother, and so we watched the 11th Hour, and it's those are the two best Doctor Who origin stories, or first episodes, and I still might give the edge to Spearhead from Space.
I would.
It's just because I think the 11th Hour has some moments that are maybe higher than anything in Spearhead from Space, but the actual story the Third Doctor story tells is so good and meaty, and the Autons, great villains.
Yes, great villains. And then you just it's just that sense of the second that John Pertwee falls out of the TARDIS onto the grass, it's this is Doctor Who changed.
Yes.
Incredibly in that moment, the Brigadier and everything. It's fantastic.
So now I've also watched Doctor Who and the Silurians.
Okay, that's
and
great.
I'm midway through the Ambassadors of Death, which a lot of people say is a weaker one, and maybe it gets that way. The first two episodes are fucking crackerjacked, on crack, good Doctor Who. And I don't know, it's 7 episodes, so anything can happen. The early John Pertwee serials are long.
Yeah, that one, I remember Ambassadors of Death being long in the tooth.
Yeah. But Doctor Who and the Silurians is not. It's 7 episodes.
It's fantastic,
that is, because I've seen, The Invasion, which is an 8-episode one, and it's great, but it gets a little long in the tooth here and there. Doctor Who and the Silurians is they had 7 episodes of story to tell.
Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing. Even by the 7th episode, I was they could actually have done a little more with this almost. Mm-hmm. But it's great. I see why, the Silurians I know weren't around for a ton of episodes in Classic Who, but I see why modern writers were we got to do more with those guys. It's just a good story. And it's so clearly a template for so many modern Doctor Who stories where it's the humans and the aliens are being assholes. What do I do? And there's something about the John Pertwee run so far as I'm watching through it that I love, that it's one of the only periods where the Doctor is clearly an underdog, because he's not everyone just automatically trusts him. He's not the president of the world the way they make him in Modern Who with unit stories.
And he doesn't even have his TARDIS.
No.
Specifically in those first couple of seasons, he can't just do that. He can't just sort of take his TARDIS and do some magic bullshit with it.
And his greatest nemesis, John Pertwee's greatest nemesis, it's not the Master, it's not the Daleks, it's bureaucracy.
Sure, yeah.
Because even someone who's very well-meaning like the Brigadier can only do so much, and he has to fight this evil fucking bureaucracy. And that's something I love about it, because John Pertwee, who I've been looking into, was, kind of a comedian before he did Doctor Who, is so funny in those moments where it's just the exasperation of I know what's going on here, but I also am self-aware that I sound like a crazy man, you know? And I just love the extended cast, getting the Brigadier, who I've seen in different stories, because throw a dart at a classic Doctor Who story, you might get the Brigadier. He's in enough of them, and he's just. Do we count him as a companion?
I do not technically, but he's more. He's more than a companion. He's this like sustained supporting character for that like entire 5-year stretch.
Yeah, and just one of the best Doctor Who characters ever. Yeah. Nicholas Courtney. Because the great thing about Nicholas Courtney is he feels like he could have stepped out of a Monty Python sketch, where he looks like kind of the general from the Monty Python stuff, but he's playing it dead serious. But I also think he knows when the Brigadier gets to be badass or when he gets to be funny. Yeah. And he's so good at any of those modes. And just playing off the Doctor, again, because he's the face of this bureaucracy.
But the other thing he plays so well is being that really stern, hard-ass military guy, but also having to be open-minded enough to accept all the insanity around him. And especially as it goes on, particularly when you get to Robot, when the Doctor regenerates into the Fourth Doctor, and you just see how used to this bullshit the Brigadier, because he's already kind of had to go through it with the Second Doctor going to the Third Doctor. So by that point, he's just like, oh boy, this is happening again, huh? Here we go.
It's one of the things I love in Spearhead from Space is there's no one moment where there's a big explanation of I'm a Time Lord and I regenerate and blah blah blah. He just the Brigadier is logical enough that he figures it out and goes with it,
because he knows that the most crazy impossible shit happens when this dude is involved. So he just rolls with it immediately.
Which is what makes him good at his job. That's what you need if you're going to be the head of unit.
Exactly.
No, it's basically a period where Doctor Who is a 1970s X-Files, and I love it.
Yeah, it's really great.
And I haven't even gotten to Jo Grant, who I love, so I want to, Liz Shaw is fine.
Yeah, she's a good companion.
They did not, I think, fully know what to do with her.
Yeah, she's almost too capable a companion, that it felt like they didn't know, she's too strong a character to be able to sort of exist in that role, I think, at that point in the show.
It's a weird thing where the most awkward moments with her are when they try to put her into a typical companion role, which is usually when you get kidnapped or something, and it's well, that doesn't feel I don't think Liz Shaw would actually, that feels out of character for her, because she's a genius, know? So anyway, but it's fun, and I just love that the Doctor has a car he named Bessie, and it is an ongoing thing, and I want someone from Modern Who to tell me why we have gotten 10 years into Modern Who without Bessie.
It's absurd that Modern Doctor Who has not gone to that well a little bit harder, at least in one throwback story, because Bessie is the memorable iconic recurring one, but there's a whole series of accoutrements that the Doctor develops. I mean, that's where the more sort of iconic sonic screwdriver starts coming from, is the Third Doctor era, and he has fucking hovercrafts and all this bullshit he gets. It's amazing.
And am I wrong, or in the first episode of The Ambassadors of Death, has he decked out the TARDIS like a living room?
I don't remember.
There's a hilarious scene where he accidentally teleports Liz Shaw into the future 10 seconds. Oh, right, and he's experimenting with it. And it's the TARDIS console, but it's not the little round things on the walls. It's a living room, and he's got a TV and stuff.
Is that the point where he has taken the console out of the TARDIS shell? Because he does that at one point.
All right, then that's probably what it is.
Because that's definitely what it is when you get to Inferno, which is also fucking amazing. You're going to love Inferno.
Because I just looked at the list of stories of early Third Doctor, and I'm I want to see, I've heard about every one of these. Yeah. I want to see them.
Yeah. It's a fantastic era for the show.
So I'm just having fun with that. And now there's this, Service Brit box I use where you can stream them pretty easily. Mm-hmm. And that's just, that was not an option before with Classic Who. Because, I bought one serial, Spearhead from Space, on Blu-ray. Any other serial on DVD, they all are $20 a pop. Yeah. And it's a ridiculous way to collect. I wish they would put out a box set, but they're not going to.
That would make it more feasible.
Yeah, but anyway. We'll talk about Doctor Who on the bonus cast.
There will be a lot more about John Pertwee there, because there's a lot to talk about with
I'm just having fun watching classic Doctor Who. So let's see. What stuff did you have going on, Sean?
So mainly I've just sort of been playing a little bit through Destiny 2 here and there. I do really appreciate what Destiny 2 has done to sort of structure itself, that it feels like I can, by putting in a couple of hours a week and just in little sort of bits here and there, I can make a lot of progress with my character. Yeah. And there's something really satisfying about that. I think it sort of can exist in the background and be the thing I play when I'm kind of in the mood for it. And in a way that Destiny 1, it felt like you either had to be really playing Destiny 1, or not playing Destiny. Like it was because you had to put so much energy into the original Destiny to make any progress at all. Just like, I just want to get that one strange coin, motherfucker, just this one, so I can pay Xur his fucking blood toll, so I can get my goddamn like knucklehead radar or something.
I mean, we said this last week. Destiny 2 allows you to have a healthy relationship with the game.
Yeah. And
I love that. I'm not playing Destiny 2 as much as I did Destiny 1 3 years ago, but I'm enjoying what I'm playing a lot more.
Yeah, I appreciate that I don't feel like inhumanly compelled to put that much time into the game, so I'm freed up to do other stuff, which I've been putting a lot more time into No Man's Sky than I was expecting. So I talked about this on last week's podcast, of that by then I had only kind of touched it and kind of like warped out of the first system just to sort of see what all the new content they've added. And now I've played a lot more than that, where I've kind of gone down... And I've gone pretty far down, like the sort of, I guess, what is the main story mode? I have no idea how far it goes because it's all new stuff, and I have, like, it's really hard to sort of even try to get a sense of where it would end. But it's a really amazing thing that they've done with that game, where it feels completely different to me than it was before. It's something where all the like the basics of No Man's Sky are definitely there. Like, you're still landing on planets and jumping out and like, you know, scanning weird life forms and getting like credits for like uploading your discoveries and like, you know, zapping plutonium crystals so you can fuel your boosters on your ship. Like, it still is all of that stuff. But when I was playing No Man's Sky when it launched, like, the way I played the game was, like, I went to a planet, and it was, like spent a lot of time on a planet. It was, like, I'm going to scan all the animals and sort of, like, see what, like, get all the weird shit that's on this planet, see everything it has to offer, and only move on until I, like, kind of, like, scoured pretty thoroughly every single system I visited and all the planets I visited. Whereas in No Man's Sky, as it exists now, like, you can absolutely still play it that way, but I don't feel compelled to anymore. Instead... it's a really interesting experience of where I'm totally fine with, like, I'm just going to dip onto this planet, do the one thing I need to do on this planet, and, like, go off to the next place. And I'm way more choosy now about the planets that, like, this is this, like, glacial planet with, like, high security drones. Fuck off. I don't need to spend, like, I'll go here, I'll go, like, to the weird, like, communication thing I need to go to, talk to this guy, and then I'll leave. It's, like, never going to see you again planet. Like, I'm not even going to rename you or anything. Like, I'm not renaming every planet or in that stuff. I'm just only when, like, there's a planet I really like and I spend a lot of time there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make this a thing where I'm going to name this planet, I'm going to name some of the animals, I'm going to do that. Whereas originally, that's like what the game was almost to me, was doing all that stuff. So what they've done with No Man's Sky, with like the number of different patches that they've released, up to like the most recent one, which added this whole story thing I've been following, is they have added in so many different layers of kind of different objectives that you can pursue, that it gives you a lot more of a sense of like you still are very much sort of choosing what you want to go after, but there's a better sense of structure over what that is. And whatever you're choosing to do, you're also going to be simultaneously sort of accomplishing other goals at the same time, which is something that I've found is really fun. So like kind of like how it's worked out is, one, you still have that sort of like Atlas thing, which is what No Man's Sky was originally structured around. And that was something where, if you remember how No Man's Sky at launch began, you like woke up in the middle of nowhere on this planet in the middle of nowhere, and you were like confronted with this weird glowing red orb thing that talked in your mind in a crazy sci-fi way, and it was like, you know, basically it was like, I am a god, like follow me and worship me, blah blah blah. And when I played the game, I encountered that. I'm like, now fuck off. No, like I'm not going to worship you, weird magic red space entity. Like, I'm going to go do my own shit. And that was a choice of, like, you either follow the Atlas path or you just go do your own shit. And I just did my own shit and kind of completely ignored that. Now in No Man's Sky, that doesn't happen. Instead, once you've kind of gotten off your planet and gotten a little bit into the game, you are sort of confronted with your, like, kind of internal monologue of your character comes up and says... basically, like, I have all these memories and, like, I have this, like, impression of some weird orb and of something out there that is kind of pulling me. Am I going to pursue this, or am I going to abandon that, like, search for answers and instead just live my own life? And that's how that choice is presented to you. And presented to me that way, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to follow the Atlas thing. When it's just, I wake up and I have no idea what anything is, and a, like, magic red orb tells me to worship it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to. You sound evil to me. I watched enough Star Trek not to fucking trust you, asshole. Whereas when it's this more sort of, like, self-motivated sort of, like, pursuit of discovery, then it's like, okay, yeah, I will do this. So that way you unlock the Atlas thing that you can follow, where you go find, like, the weird monuments or whatever and follow that Atlas path. That still kind of exists and has been touched up along the way. But then also you have the sort of other two main threads is the story mode thing that's really interesting, where you get sort of, you encounter these communications by different aliens that are not the same, like sort of the three alien species that originally existed, the Gek or the Korvax and the Vy'keen or whatever, the sort of like the lizard dudes, the robots, and like the big angry kind of almost Klingon lizard dudes, the warrior race. Instead of being those three, they're like unique alien entities that communicate with you. It's all basically through text. It's not like a lot of voice acting or something, but they communicate with you in your ship. Kind of like once I like transported into the system, I just got this thing of like a hologram popped up, and there was this alien called Artemis talking to me. That apparently she's another traveler, whatever, of like another person who has woken up with no idea where they are, who they are. They're completely different than everyone else they've encountered, and they have this weird like memory or impression of this red orb that's kind of drawing them somewhere. And I've sort of been following that path, and you kind of encounter some other travelers that are all like completely unique looking, like weird character models, like a weird robot dude that kind of like has like this impossible sort of like way that he's put together. It's kind of hard to describe. He like looks really funky, and kind of following that story, and that's way more compelling than I thought it would have been. And sort of the part that I've just finished sort of kind of culminated in this really crazy thing that happened where I basically activated a portal to try to find out where Artemis is, because she's been stranded somewhere in the universe. And I activated this portal and got sucked into this portal and got transported to some crazy manufactured, like fabricated planet. And then I got transported right in front of the red orb. And then I got transported clear onto the other side of the galaxy, so far that like I had no idea where the fuck I was. Because you open up that galaxy map and it's like, oh right, this is the game that has 15 quintillion planets. Where the fuck am I? Where the fuck was all my old shit? And that was a really crazy feeling. And so that story mode has been really interesting. And then the other, like the third main objective you have that you can pursue is you can start a base and hire people at the base to sort of do, like, you can make vehicles, you can research new kinds of technologies there, you can do all this stuff. And each of the three people, you have like basically a builder guy who helps you get new things you can attach to your base. You have a guy who manages your vehicle bay, and then you have another guy who's your sort of like science research guy. And each of them give you different quest lines that you can pursue to get new things from them and get new like blueprints and all the stuff you can learn from them. So that stuff you're kind of like learning along the way of getting different kinds of rare materials and stuff. And you every once in a while you can go to like the space stations have a portal that you can teleport back to your base and teleport back to where you were. So the thing that's really fun is that at any given moment when I'm playing that game, I can just sort of choose to be like, okay, I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to like follow this storyline, or oh, let me land on this planet and grab some of this like silicate stuff so that I can go back to my science dude and give that to him, and he'll give me this new material or this new blueprint for something else. And then sometimes the different quest lines will intersect where now I need to get my science guy some stuff so that I can continue pursuing the main story mode. And like all that stuff, the game is basically completely different, and it's a really crazy thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a game I would enjoy playing.
It's really fucking good. Yeah. It's I was really surprised by it because I was not expecting to put this much more time into it.
Yeah.
But it is something that like I've just been sort of sucked along of wanting to see, particularly the kind of like really weird, abstract sci-fi bullshit that they do in that game is like really to my taste. There's something of like, particularly when I had like encountered that teleportation thing and got teleported all over the place, like that was the right kind of like almost like vaguely sort of Lovecraftian cosmic horror style, like, oh right, like I am faced with powers that I do not understand, and I am utterly at the whims of these other forces that my character does not control. And even just being able to sort of like articulate in my mind that I am a character in No Man's Sky and not just this like weird vessel to go wander around and like marvel at the expanse of this thing while I listen to a podcast. It's really insane what they've done with the game.
Well, that's neat. I mean, that's definitely a happier ending to that story than we thought it might be a year ago.
Yeah. No. Again, I'll say again, like what I did last week. If you got No Man's Sky and you have not like traded it in or something and you still have it and felt like burned by that game at launch, try it again. Like it might be what you were looking for then now.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I want to talk about a new game that I played that will almost certainly be on my top 10 list for the year. And it's one you probably have not heard of because this is a true fucking indie game, which means
Right, yeah.
one person made it and put it up on their website. But I heard about this from Kotaku and Polygon and a couple other sites that wrote little write-ups about it, and I thought it sounded fascinating. And this is a game called Butterfly Soup from a developer named Brianna Lay, who is our age. She's 23. Yeah. And it's kind of the pitch for it is it's about teenage lesbians in like an Asian American diaspora in California, I think, who are on a baseball team together. And it's like, and that's like a hook. Like, okay, that sounds like an interesting like point of view that we don't see in video games a lot. And it's a visual novel. The articles I read, they kind of cited like 5-6 hours long. It took me less than that, but I read fast, so your mileage may vary on length.
I assume it's not voice acting or anything.
No voice acting, just the text and really, really beautiful, lovely, hand-drawn art and stuff. Well, it's on a computer, but you know what I mean.
You can hand draw art on a computer. That technology exists, John.
Yes, it does. It's you have to. It's a weird thing to get your head around. Anyway, but yes, and you can get it from the developer's website. Just Google Butterfly Soup, you'll find it, and you can even you can get it for free. Although you shouldn't be a piece of shit and give like $5 if you enjoy it, because you can name your own price, and you can get a little PDF art book, which is really fun. And I'll bring it up for myself just so I can remember things while I'm going through it. But I played through this game in like 2 sittings on one day. And really is absolutely, like, the hype I had heard online from people talking about this game is absolutely true. It is a great visual novel in that it is just beautifully written. It is absolutely hilarious, like, easily the funniest game I've played this year, in that I was routinely, like, belly laughing out loud at this game that I'm, just reading on my screen alone in my living room or something. And that's kind of a rare experience. I don't know, I don't really get that a lot. And it has such insight to these characters. It draws such vivid characters. It creates such a vivid world and point of view for these characters. And I think it has some really interesting, profound things to say about, how we make identities and the process of growing up, and how, the people we meet and interact with sort of shape us and pressures, but also, and those are very universal things. It also has very, I think, specific cultural things to say about, the moment in time in which it's set, which is between, like the early 2000s when the characters are in 3rd grade, and then 2008 when the characters are freshmen in high school. That's how I know they're 1 year below where we would be.
Yeah.
Because we would have been, because they reference like Obama's upcoming election and stuff like that. And I know it's California because they were talking about Prop 8 and all of that stuff from 2008. And it's one of the things that I love about this game is that actually that setting and it being by a developer who is, like I said, very young, our age, is interesting because, and I've been thinking about this lately, we're starting to get in the different mediums the first like great artists of our own generation who are writing stuff from a voice and a period that like is an access point we have as well. Like it's not 80s nostalgia, which I'm sick and fucking tired of. But like, late 90s, early 2000s nostalgia, which has not been strip mined yet. Yeah. And so like the references in this game are characters referencing going home and playing Smash Brothers Melee on GameCube and Sonic Adventure 2. And, later when you get to 2008, all the election stuff and some of the anxieties around Proposition 8 and the idea of this moment that both felt incredibly hopeful in that, our first black president is about to get elected and he's really progressive and all these things, but also like the backlash to that was already starting, and oh god, if only these characters could see what ultimately happened with all that. It doesn't all have a happy ending. Anyway, but it's so all of that to me is fascinating because I just love hearing a voice in writing that's like, yes, that's how kids talk. That's how even though this is a slightly different experience than I had. I'm not a girl. And I'm not a lesbian, and I'm not Asian American,
and you're not a baseball player,
and I'm not a baseball player. But
none of these things.
I'm none of these things. But I was still a kid growing up in the United States in this era, and I love all those cultural touchstones that you see, and just the authenticity of the writing there. For I think anyone is almost an immediate buy-in that helps you realize how authentic everything in this game feels, and true to life, and true to an experience or an idea that comes from this, from this author, from the Brianna Lay. And it's all of that is fascinating. It's also it is ridiculously fun. The characters are so fun to just hang out with and see them talk and see what their lives are like and the experiences they have. Again, the moment-to-moment character writing is as good as any game I have played this year. Just every bit as good. It is off the charts excellent. Every bit of the writing, every scene, how it is conveyed. and I think conceptualized. It's not like, a really super complex like Japanese visual novel where there's a bunch of branching paths and stuff. Right. It's pretty much the one thing, and there are some dialogue choices that can result in alternate pieces of writing, and there's a nice, robust save system. If you want to go back and see all the other options, you can do that. But mostly it is just a story that you read through, and it's got really beautiful art, as I said. I really love the character designs are just really vivid. Kind of this, it clearly has kind of an anime or a Japanese, RPG kind of aesthetic to it in some ways. Visual novel being, a Japanese medium. But it's, it is its own thing, absolutely. And the character designs are just great, and all the backgrounds. Like, there's some really striking backgrounds where the backgrounds are kind of like slightly blurred, but they look really nice, especially when they're on like the baseball diamond and things. And, one of the other things is so the game, like I said, it's like, 5-6 hours, maybe a little less than that, depending on how fast you read through it. But when I got to the end, I loved every minute of it. And then, like, the credits roll, and I was like, I didn't know it was about to end. And I actually think, one, that's the sign of a good story when you're so into it. Like, I'm not even aware of, like, this is the last scene. And some of that, then I had to think, like, did it end too soon? Did I want more of this? And on some level, yes. Like, I would love to have another 5-6 hours of this story and just see more in these characters' lives. But you also start to reflect on it, and it puts in context, okay, I see the story, this woman was telling, which is a pretty short, little, just a couple of days in these characters' lives, basically, at this pivotal moment, and some decisions that are made that will have, bigger ramifications for all of them down the road, but it's really about living in that moment. And so I do kind of love the brevity of it, and I think that's actually one of the game's strengths is it suggests such a big interior world and exterior world for these characters in such a short amount of time that you can easily imagine a version of this that's 3 times as long and follows them throughout a whole, amateur baseball season they do in high school or something. And it's not that. They play, one game, and it's a skirmish with some guys from another school, and that's it. But it really is amazing how dense this thing is. And, and again, I'm a straight white guy. Right. I think, I've seen...
And not a baseball player.
And not a baseball player.
Very important, that detail.
I love baseball, though. But, I know I've read from people, some of the people who are writing about this, maybe their life experiences are closer to what is portrayed in this game, and I think it feels like it's something that's already resonated with people in a really important way, and that's great. To paraphrase what I think it was Heather Alexandria at Kotaku was saying, like, man, I would have loved to have this game when I was figuring out sexuality in high school or something. And I'm like, yeah, I love that this exists.
Yeah.
And it's one of the great things about the moment we are in that it is, the democratization of art, and people can make games like this. It takes a lot of talent, but the actual window to getting it out there is a little easier. And I hope people can, see this and play it and be empowered by it. But also, I don't want to put too much weight on it that way, because I want to stress, it's also just really fun. This isn't like an indie game that is homework to do, which some can feel like,
Yeah.
This is not that at all. You owe it to yourself to play this game. It is absolutely fantastic. And again, you just go download it. It's on Windows, Mac, Linux, anything you want to play it on, as long as it's a computer, you can go get it. And it'll be on my top 10. It's a phenomenal game.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this trend of visual novels becoming a thing over here, mostly through the indie scene.
Yeah,
it's something that I mean, obviously, a visual novel does not need a 100-person studio to make it. But I would be interested in if at some point this becomes something where it's sort of I would just be interested to see what would a Western visual novel that is more divorced from the sort of Japanese roots of the genre, what that would look like. That you don't necessarily need the manga or anime art style. You don't need some of those character tropes and stuff like that. I feel like I've played a number of these kinds of Western style visual novels that still feel like they're so attached to those roots. I'd be interested to see what a Western one that goes way further with that would be.
And obviously this does not go too far from that, but I would say I think you'd find this interesting because it's in conversation with that idea. I think the form itself is thematically important because it is, again, about this Asian American diaspora in this community and these characters who are American, but they have these Asian, each one is from a different Asian community. And I also love that idea of that, there are Asian melting pots in the United States within the larger American melting pot, and all bringing different traditions. But also this is a moment in time when all American teens are inundated with anime and stuff like that. And so I think the form itself is interesting, but it's about, those cultural differences too. And I like that. It's one of the first visual novels I've seen in this trend that does feel like it's not just taking that because they like the visual novel thing in Japan. It's because it's thematically important to what they're saying. But yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see if that becomes bigger over here at all at any point.
Because it's been such an ongoing thing in Japan for like decades at this point.
Yeah, and we've already talked about how, like, the Telltale games would be so much better served if they were just straight up visual novels. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there are already forces in the gaming scene in the West that are pushing in that direction, and I almost feel are like afraid to embrace it. But
I just feel like it's kind of depressing to me that like I can't even have, like, we're not to the point where you can even have the debate of whether or not visual novels are video games, or whether they're a different, like, medium entirely, which, like, I kind of think they are, but they're so not known over here. You can't even have that argument yet. Yeah. It's like, God damn it. Like, it's because it's such an interesting medium to me, but it's just never, like, quite caught on over here, and it feels like this indie rush, like, is kind of pushing it more to the forefront. That's been going on for years as well. Yeah. So it's a slow push, but it's a really cool way to convey a story.
It is.
I hope that more people sort of like get into that medium.
And I think this is a masterful use of the medium. So I just wanted to give a shout out for it. You should play this game and then tell other people about it, because it is a true indie game. This is not like one person made it and then a big studio bought it. This is someone put it out on their site, and it's one of the best things you'll play this year. So that's the stuff. You want to move on to the news, Sean?
Let's go on to the news, John.
Let's talk about a trailer for a game that was decidedly not made by one person.
Yeah, I would say that's one way to...
Maybe hundreds of times that. Yeah. And that is, we got another trailer for Red Dead Redemption 2.
Our first actual trailer. The other one was more of like a weird teaser thing.
And this one still kind of is too. We still have no gameplay. We're kind of in a Mass Effect Andromeda mode with this at the moment, which is we're not getting... this is more substantial than anything we ever got for Andromeda, but still, like...
And it's Rockstar, and Rockstar is always very deliberate with how they release the information on their games.
Yeah, I'm not saying I think this game will release broken or anything. We're just, it's very drip, drip, drip piece of information. But this was the first, like, trailer-esque thing. We look at some of the characters, some of the setting. My reaction was, it looks very pretty. The main character looks mean, and I might have grown out of Rockstar. Meh. But I don't know. What did you think?
It's something where I just feel like this trailer should have been the teaser they released like 5 months ago or whatever now. And then they should have, like, I feel like I can say the exact same thing about this that I feel like we talked about with their teaser back then, which is like, I know that you're making a sequel to Red Dead Redemption, so I know you're making another GTA-style game in the Old West. I need you to pitch me a premise for this. That is something that's more than just Red Dead Redemption 2. And this has a little bit of that, like we have an idea of... I'm guessing this game is probably going to have multiple protagonists, is my assumption.
Yeah.
But like, so far, all we know is that there's this Arthur Morgan guy, which... he seems like a real big fucking asshole, and that we know for sure it's a prequel. And not just sort of like in terms of the time, like history wise, but specifically the story of that. You have that Dutch character who was a character in Red Dead Redemption 1 that you kill, basically, spoilers, he's one of the last people you kill because he was part of your old gang. If you know the premise of Red Dead Redemption, you know that Dutch is going to die at some point over the course of that story.
That game's almost 10 years old. Yeah. It's okay.
And then you have that sort of like, it's about the Vanderlinde gang or whatever, and apparently this Arthur Morgan guy is a part of that. So that's kind of a pitch of a premise, but that's a pitch that you can get on like a fucking like press release. Like, I wanted them to pitch me more strongly, like, what is this story? Like, the basics of what kind of Western are you going after? What is, like, the basic sort of setup and feel of the story? And the most you get is that it's, like, the main character's a real fucking asshole is the most kind of sense I got of, like, what it is and how it's different from Red Dead Redemption 1. If that even is actually going to be representative of the full game.
Yeah, and I don't know, Rockstar game where there's an asshole going around and abusing women and stuff, it's like, oh boy, how new, how original, Rockstar. Yeah. You're so pushing yourself. And maybe the game will push itself, but that's not a pitch that shows any kind of evolution in style. And I should articulate something here about Rockstar that, like, I think I've hinted at on the podcast, on tweets, but like, it's something that's been growing in my mind for a couple years, especially as I think one of the defining trends in this gaming generation for me is how the open world genre has like blown the doors off its own hinges, and it's really expanded with things like The Witcher 3 and Breath of the Wild, and even some late generation things like Sleeping Dogs or something that really felt like they did something new for what had become a really stale genre by the end of the last console generation.
Or you have even something like Uncharted: The Lost Legacy this year that sort of takes a lot of those ideas and then plays with it in a very different format.
And I think Grand Theft Auto 5 felt creaky to me the moment it came out. And I go back to that game now, and if you remind me that game is only 4 years old, I'd be like, that's only 4 years old, because Grand Theft Auto 5 was not a significant evolution on what Rockstar does at the time it came out.
Yeah.
Let alone, I think an evolution on the open world form that Rockstar very much helped usher in 10, 20 years ago, but I think had grown really, really stale, both as gameplay, but also I think as storytelling. I think the kind of nihilism and misogyny they deal in, it's kind of like my view of South Park. It's like at a certain point, I've grown up, and that's not how I view the world anymore, and I need you guys to grow up too. And I think Red Dead Redemption, part of why if I have any residual excitement for this, it's because Red Dead Redemption did feel like a more mature Rockstar. Yeah. And parts of Grand Theft Auto 4 did too. I think Grand Theft Auto 5 is a regression in a lot of ways to me. But like Red Dead Redemption 1, I think has clunkiness to it, but did feel like an attempt at something more mature. It doesn't have great female characters, but took a crack at it in some points.
I like Bonnie in that game a lot.
She's fine.
That's not fair.
Okay.
Come on. Like, especially if you think about, like, for a AAA video game in that space at that time, like, come on, man.
I don't know if that's an excuse that I'm okay with. But yeah, anyway.
I mean, you have to sort of take it in the context of when it came out.
I don't know. We had Mass Effect 2 the same year.
Like, what's your problem with Bonnie? She's cool.
She's fine. Are you really going to say Bonnie's a great female game character? Like, by Rockstar standards, sure. By art standards, I think it's a different thing. Like, she's not one of the first 5 things I think about in Red Dead Redemption.
She kind of is for me. Like, because I think she's such a critical part of the opening of that game that I think is so strong.
Okay. I've not played the opening of that game in a long time. Played later in that game. Anyway. But it's just like, and this for me, like, Red Dead Redemption 2, I want it to be good. I want it to be more than... And this trailer, clearly, it's beautiful. It's their first next-gen game they've made, and I'm excited to see what they do with that. But, like, I need the story to be a step forward, and I need it to feel like this is a game that is aware of how the landscape of games it's entering into has changed. And if it still feels like the GTA 4 model that Red Dead Redemption 1 and all the DLC and GTA 5 are very much just an extension of, that's going to feel super creaky in the year 2018. And I think there's a lot of space where they could innovate on that, and I would like to see that, but I don't know.
Yeah, like I basically agree with you that particularly it's like GTA 5 feels like something that when that game came out, like there are parts of GTA 5 that almost feel like it's like a step away from like where it kind of like was trying to sort of hit at something that I feel like is almost like that sort of like the Trump America thing. Like it was almost not necessarily in like a way that I'm saying like it deconstructs it or something, but like almost hits that nerve in a weird way. Yeah. I think when you look back at it retrospectively. But like, yeah, I think at the time.
Here's how I compare it.
Yeah.
Grand Theft Auto 5 to me is the Avatar of video games.
Sure.
In that it is hyper successful. I mean, it's other than
it's one of the best selling games ever.
It's other than Minecraft, and if you take out like pack-in games like Wii Sports, it's the highest selling game.
Yeah.
That and Minecraft. And so it is ridiculously successful, and it has left almost no cultural footprint. Like, a lot of people do Let's Plays in it, but I don't hear a lot of like active discussion of it. It clearly did not have like a huge influence on things because that genre just went and did its own thing. I mean, that, again, Sleeping Dogs is that same year, and those games feel a generation apart to me. Not on like the technical side,
right,
but in terms of I think how they approach things. And so to me, it's kind of like that. Like Avatar is this movie that's like, you have to be reminded that Avatar made $3 billion. Right. Because like no one cosplays as Na'vi, you know? Not Na'vi from Legend of Zelda. People cosplay as that. I mean, I don't know how they do it, but I'm sure they do.
They must.
The Na'vi from Avatar. And so that's kind of how I think of Grand Theft Auto 5. Anyway.
Sure. I think that's slightly unfair to it, just more in terms of the Grand Theft Auto Online thing. I think has had way more influence on the video game space than you're probably aware of.
It's had gross influence,
but yes. Influence or not, like I think it very much has had a lot of influence. Because you can't make that much money and like continue to make that much money without it having an influence, because it's not just like Grand Theft Auto 5 came out and it sold a shit ton. But it's sold a shit ton and has continued to make money through microtransactions since then. I'm not saying that it's a good influence. I'm saying, but it is an influence.
But it's so insular. I don't ever hear anyone talk about, like in my circles, like that never breaks out of its own circle and becomes part of the larger conversation.
Sure.
You know, like it's on this weird island of incredible success and obviously a big player base, And to a degree where I'm kind of surprised Rockstar is making another single-player campaign.
Right.
Like, this almost feels like the moment where, like, Valve saw the money coming in from Steam and just pulled the lever and canceled everything. You would think Rockstar would be like, well, we're done with narratives. You know,
I'm just assuming that Red Dead Redemption 2 was so deep into pre-production or maybe production by the time that stuff started kicking off that they're like, we might as well finish it, right, guys? To give us something to do. But anyways, yeah. So I think that, like, Grand Theft Auto 5, in terms of its storytelling and in terms of how it uses the open world genre, it is definitely that thing of, like, Rockstar just likes to... Like, Rockstar kind of always has felt like they are... Kind of like in a way that Nintendo, for most of, like, modern video game history, has felt like they just kind of are in parallel. Like, they just exist kind of outside of the main conversation. And, like, you know, Nintendo's still making 3D platformers. Nobody else is making 3D platformers. Rockstar is making their weird fucking open world games that, like... We moved on from the specific, like, the larger open world genre moved on from the specifics of the Rockstar, like, GTA model, early 360 generation. Like, I would say, like, Saints Row 2 is by the time, like, that was done. Like,
by the time you get to Skyrim, it's completely transformed.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something where, like that thing of, like, you have the mini-map and you have, like, the, like, initial of all the, like, people that are the main story givers, and, like, that very specific Rockstar thing, lots of people copied that immediately after Grand Theft Auto 3. And then kind of like a little bit in that PS2, Xbox One, GameCube generation. And then I think early 360, early PS3, we very quickly moved past that. And I agree that, like, Rockstar did not give a shit that people moved past that and has kept on trucking along. I think the reason that Red Dead Redemption worked so well, and the reason I'm hopeful for Red Dead Redemption 2, is that it allows them to sidestep a lot of things in that. One, nobody is making Western games. And the only people that, like, every once in a while one kind of comes out, it is really bad. And so they get to, like, that gives them a really unique identity in a way that, like, crime story in a video game is not a unique identity and has not been for decades now. But, like, telling a Western story in a video game format and exploring, like, an old West America setting and all that stuff, that's still fresh. Like, even since Red Dead Redemption.
Yes.
Nobody has really done that. And then also, I think really the thing about Red Dead Redemption that makes it the best Rockstar game is that they didn't have to do their fucking terrible, like, quote-unquote, like, satire of America that I think has always been fucking awful in Grand Theft Auto, but, like, people just sort of, like, accepted it, and it was more sort of, like, vogue in 2001, 2003, you know, that GTA 3, GTA Vice City era, to kind of do that. That's very much the, like, Grand Theft Auto and, like, like Grand Theft Auto 3 era and South Park are on, like, the same level to me of, like, you are doing this weird satire of American culture that doesn't feel like it actually has any teeth. It's, like, trying to be transgressive without actually addressing any real issues in American culture, and sort of, like, kind of pokes fun at some things but doesn't have any sort of, like, serious thought to put into it. And that was the stuff that Grand Theft Auto 5 or 4 kind of got away from a little bit, because it had the, like, you know, immigrant story thing with Nico helped that game so much. And then 5 so regressed so far back from that. You had 4 that is not a flawless story by any stretch of the imagination, but is way better than
it tried to
the
grow
other
up.
Stuff. Yeah. And then Red Dead Redemption is, like, really good because it just gets to be like a classic Western style story. It just gets to fuel off of all of those tropes from decades of film history. It's, like, fantastic, like, fucking awesome. Like, video games just never do any of this stuff. Great. And then 5 comes out and it's like, this feels like a sequel to fucking Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Like, this isn't even as good as, like, San Andreas in terms of the storytelling. Like, this is so fucking bad in so many ways, particularly once you get to the end of that game and you realize all of the issues they've raised, they have no idea how to try to settle it or say anything about any of that stuff, and they're just sort of, like, poking at things with sticks, and that's what that story was. It's just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And so I am very hopeful that Red Dead Redemption 2, because it's a sequel to Red Dead Redemption, gets to sidestep a lot of those problems. And I assume that there are a lot of people that were, like, from the Red Dead Redemption team and the Grand Theft Auto 5 team are not the same team. Like, there's a lot of crossover, but they're different studios, because Red Dead Redemption is, like, Rockstar Austin. So I'm hoping that means that it's, like, we're getting more of just, like, let's improve off of Red Dead Redemption. It kind of not bring the GTA 5 stuff back, because, it's... particularly in the storytelling, that game was not where it needed to be.
Yeah, I my only point with all this with the teaser is that it's cool, fine, but, like, I'm not automatically on board with this the way I would have been if they announced, if Red Dead Redemption 2 was coming out in 2012 and like we hadn't had the GTA 5 stuff and whatnot. Right. And that would have been the wrong moment for it, but I'm just saying like I would have been more bought in then, and I feel like it's been a long time. I mean, it'll been almost a decade when this thing comes out, and it'll be interesting to see if they can really go back there. I don't know if I'm sold on the whole prequel with the same gang we saw them all die, and that maybe there's something there that really feels like squeezing a lemon that's already been squeezed, but I don't know.
It's just, I think it's just something where this trailer to me is just not that good. Like the trailer, like the only thing that's really interesting about the trailer to me is just that, like, oh, look how nice this game looks. Like, right, like we haven't actually had a Rockstar game made for this like generation of consoles, and whatever Rockstar's issues are, like detailed settings and like all that kind of stuff, that is not one of their problems. Like they are still the best in the biz at that kind of stuff. So like I'm excited to see that, and I'm sure that is going to, like, I already knew that was going to be a part of the game. And so like what I would look for in a trailer is that kind of like, what is the stuff I don't know about this game that you can tell me that would make me excited? And I feel like telling me that like, oh, the protagonist is going to be an asshole and it's a prequel, that's not that exciting. Like that's just like whatever. Like give me a sense of tone, give me a pitch, give me something to like sink my teeth into, especially because this is the second trailer and they just didn't do that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on and talk about another piece of video gaming news. Kind of a minor but interesting thing to me, which is that Nintendo announced this week that the Wii Shop channel, so the shop on the original Wii gaming console, that's 11 years old now, is closing down next year. They're going to stop selling you points in like early next year, and then by the end of the year, they will shut it down altogether, and you will not be able to download games for the original Wii anymore. And this is significant, I think, for a couple of reasons. One that I think is interesting to think about is that this is really the first significant like gaming eShop on a console that is being completely shuttered. And obviously this was going to have to happen eventually. The 360 and PS3, eventually you're not going to be able to buy games on. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that will never happen. Who knows?
One day that will. I can literally guarantee you that one day that will happen.
Yeah, but like, and obviously online services were shuttered on like, the original Xbox, but you weren't buying games on it the same way. And so that kind of feels like a significant reminder of like, right, all these digital goods you're buying are very transient, so keep that in mind. But the other thing that's interesting about this is that the Wii Shop channel, you might forget, that's where the virtual console that Nintendo does was born, was on the Wii.
Nintendo does a thing called the virtual console. I didn't know.
They might not ever again, but they did back in the day. And it had, and I think this was a sobering statistic to see because people compiled lists at the time of like this announcement. There are over 200 games in the Wii Virtual Console that are not on the Wii U or 3DS Virtual Console. Oh, jeez. Over 200. And if you look at that list, it's incredible some of the games they had on there. Like, it was a truly robust, like the most robust, like, classic gaming network out there. And to this day, there's really hasn't been anything that touched the Wii Virtual Console. And there were things like all 3 Super Star Wars games you could get for SNES Virtual Console on the Wii. The Indiana Jones Greatest Adventure one, also a LucasArts one, you could get on there. A bunch of Square Enix, like original Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, which would be 1, 4, 6, are on there. And 3 only got a re-release on the SNES Classic now, something like that. Or the Chrono Trigger, the only time the SNES version of Chrono Trigger has been re-released is on the Wii Virtual Console. They had they had TurboGrafx 16 games on there. You can get all the Sonic the Hedgehog games on there, the Genesis versions. And they had a huge Genesis library. They had a lot of Nintendo 64 games. Here's one that hasn't ever been re-released that you're going to be surprised by this. The original Smash Brothers, its only re-release is on the Wii Virtual Console. It never made it to Wii U.
Yeah, and since we haven't gotten, there's no GameCube Virtual Console anywhere, that's the only version of Smash Bros. That could be released on the Virtual Console.
Yeah, so it's crazy. So, a couple things. One, if you have a Wii and you want any of those, buy them now and download them, because I will probably grab a couple of ones I've always been meaning to get. Especially because now I can take my SNES Classic controller and plug it into a Wiimote and you can just use it that way. But, some of those, if you don't have a cart, that might be a good, way to grab those if you don't want to do, extra legal emulation and stuff like that. But it's also just sobering because, I enjoyed the Virtual Console on the Wii U and the 3DS, and they went into some new areas, like their Game Boy and Game Boy Advance stuff was cool. But it was so anemic compared to what came before. And now we're on the Switch, and there is no Virtual Console in sight. And I think it is a non-zero probability that there will be no virtual console on the Switch.
Right.
Like, probably there will be one day, but I think it is a non-zero possibility that it will just never be a thing.
Yeah, that instead it'll be this like very different, like weird sort of whatever their games with gold version thing that's going to come eventually. But that's not necessarily the same thing as a virtual console.
And that's so far only NES.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more out there. So
you can buy Arcade Archives NES Nintendo arcade games for like $8 a pop. Do you want to buy the Mario Brothers for $8?
I did get that to try it out and talk about it, and there wasn't really enough to talk about, so I didn't even put it on the outline.
I mean, that's an $8 purchase, isn't it? Mario Brothers. You can sure hit that POW block, huh?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's the arcade version, and I have seen a cabinet of that before, so it was a cool, but yeah, not $8 cool. Anyway, the point being just that, one, kind of sad that this is going away, but they gave us advance notice. If you want any of those games, go get them. That's nice that we have advance notice. But two, just like, boy, it would be so cool if they could re-spark this initiative on the Switch. Because imagine the Nintendo Switch with that kind of robust virtual console library. You'd never need another gaming console. I mean, Jesus, they really had a robust system. And that was before they even added, their save points and stuff. Those are just the games. But it's really kind of sad to me that never took off. And some of that is not Nintendo's fault. Like, I think there's no way they would ever get the license to Super Star Wars again. Yeah. Stuff like that. Because,
that's back when LucasArts still existed, when they would have gotten that license.
So, and I think people were a lot more willing to play on a lot of these things.
It was just something where that space for classic games re-releases did not really exist in 2006 and 7 and 8.
Yeah.
And so, it just kind of... now looking back on it, just feels like, man, people just weren't really, paying attention to that market. Yeah. And Nintendo just, got their foot in and is like, okay, we can just get all this shit out here.
Yeah, and it's like we all joke about Virtual Console now, but there was a time when Nintendo was aggressive about it. And, of course, everyone's probably got a favorite game that never showed up, but that's going to be the case with... Nothing's ever going to be perfect.
Yeah.
Unless they committed to, we're going to put out all 700 Super Nintendo games.
Yes.
Which I don't think is possible, so, not going to happen. We're going to get you Super Nintendo Doom, if that's the version of Doom you want to play.
Sure.
Damn it, no. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. End of an era. If you've still got your Wii U out, of course, you can get these on there, and I might buy, the SNES version of Final Fantasy II and Chrono Trigger are ones that I think might be worth sticking around or something, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things of, because isn't the Miiverse for the Wii U is also shutting down at some point in the near future?
I think so that might already be done.
Yeah, feels like Nintendo is being a little bit more aggressive about shutting those services down than because obviously the original Xbox Live shut down, though that always felt like that was because supporting that was interfering with what they wanted to do with Xbox Live going forward, so they needed to shut it down. Whereas it's just sort of interesting to me that Nintendo's being that sort of aggressive at saying yeah, fuck this, goodbye.
Yeah, and the Wii has already had online gaming shut off for years.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So you can't go play Mario Kart Wii online anymore. But it is interesting, and part of this I think is also Nintendo looked at the sales of the Switch and was like, "Goodbye, past. Yeah, we have a bright future."
I guess that's what happens when you don't have that sort of online infrastructure continuity in any way. Is that it would be bizarre to me that Xbox 360 or PS3 games, you couldn't play them online anymore because it's just that's just the same Xbox Live and PSN.
Right.
On Xbox One, I could see if my friends were playing Halo 3 on the original Xbox 360 in your friends list, you could just see that. It'd be really weird. But yeah, because Nintendo's just been so whatever with their online service all the time, I guess you can't just assume that perpetuity.
Yeah, but who knows? We'll see how it goes in the future. They have, it's easy to make fun of the app and stuff. They have made a lot of really good improvements to their overall online account service and unifying the 3DS and the Switch and stuff. So we'll see how that all goes. But this is a sign of things to come, I think. So interesting. Before we move on to talking about the Super NES Classic, which I want to do, one piece of movie news.
Okay.
Which I have to get this off my chest to make fun of it.
Yeah.
And we avoided talking about it for several weeks because but it kept becoming more real, which is that the fourth Terminator 3 movie, is what I'm calling it, is in active development. James motherfucking Cameron is producing this thing. Deadpool director Tim Miller is directing this, fresh off of Deadpool. So they're serious because, he did direct a really successful movie. And not only is Arnold Schwarzenegger coming back, because he'll come back, I don't know, you have to give him a bag of chips and he'll play the Terminator. Linda Hamilton, who I thought was in a cave somewhere, meditating.
Or preparing for
the apocalypse.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe is a good plan.
Is also going to be in it. This is a real movie. I kept wanting to pretend it wasn't, but you look at that list of talent, they're clearly making this thing. It's coming out. It's got a date. It's 2019. And I will remind you, this is the 4th attempt to do a Terminator 3, and it is the 4th consecutive one where it has been announced as them saying we're making a trilogy. Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, new trilogy. Terminator Salvation, new trilogy. Terminator Genesis, they went so hard on the new trilogy thing that entire movie is it's like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's just previews of coming attractions of here's where we're going to go in the new Terminator trilogy. And then a week after release, it bombed so hard that Daenerys from Game of Thrones, Emilia Clarke, who played Sarah Connor in that, was yeah, I'm not coming back. I'm not doing that. And so that bombed. And all of them have failed. All of the Terminator 3 is okay. Most of them have been really bad, and it doesn't work. Terminator is a creatively bankrupt franchise, and they're trying it again, and this time they're no, this time we're going to do it right, because we've got James Cameron, and we're going to ignore the other 3 movies. All of them ignored each other, so, think about that. There was also a TV show in the middle there that we liked, but also bombed really hard.
Yeah.
It was good, but it bombed. So, clearly Terminator doesn't work, but they are going to try. It is the Sisyphean task of movies. They are rolling Arnold Schwarzenegger up a hill, and he keeps falling down, and they think we've got to roll him back up.
Do you know what a really good movie is, Jonathan? Terminator 1 was a really good fucking movie.
It is.
You know how Terminator 1 ended? With Sarah Connor looking into the oncoming storm of the future and knowing that there was actually nothing she could do to avoid her fate, but the only thing left to her was to struggle anyways. It's what a thought-provoking, powerful ending to it, a really great classic science fiction movie that in no way invites or asks for an actual fucking sequel. And we're still trying to make Terminator sequels in 2017.
And you and I don't like Terminator 2 as much as a lot of people do, but we do like it. It's a good movie.
It's a good movie. I don't think, as someone who's a huge fan of Terminator 1, I think some of the stuff it does with, the story of Terminator, I'm not a huge fan of. But as a movie in its own right, it's very good.
It's very good, and as a sequel goes, that's how you do a sequel to the Terminator. It's fine. It also, Terminator 2 has a very definitive ending.
Yeah.
And I just love that, put our feelings aside, Terminator 2 is the most beloved Terminator thing by the general public. People love Terminator 2.
The Terminator pinball machine was also very good.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever played that one, but it was very good.
I think that they still have one of those at a movie theater I go to sometimes. Anyway, but Terminator 2, people love that movie. And the only way to perpetuate that franchise is to ignore the significance of the movie everyone loves. You have to actively say the events of Terminator 2 did not matter. That's the only way you can do more Terminator, is to say, that movie you loved? Didn't matter. Everything the characters died for and stuff didn't make a difference. And I actually think one of the things that we liked about the Sarah Connor Chronicles, the TV show, is that I think it kind of leaned into that in an interesting way. And I think part of that was, being free from, it didn't have Arnold. It had new characters, or new actors doing the characters and whatnot. I think they were able to kind of be subversive with it in some interesting ways. But, Terminator 3 is just straight up, no, you can never avoid it, so let's just do this again. And Terminator 3 is at least well-directed, and so I give it props for that. Jonathan Mostow, decent action director. It's got some good action scenes, so it's worth watching. Terminator Salvation and Genesis don't even have that, and they're just awful. So, and each one is like the Jurassic Park series. Every Terminator movie is actively worse than the one that came before. Until you get to Genesis, which is just 2 hours of, oh my God, kill me.
It's something where if you have to keep on making movies in your franchise that, like you say, both sort of kind of have to completely kind of shut down and disempower the ending of the most beloved movie in your franchise, and then also literally erase from the continuity all the movies that came after that, which is something that they've had to do multiple times now. Maybe you just fucked up too much. Maybe you can just make a new science fiction movie that has a killer time-traveling robot in it. It's not like Terminator's the only thing that does that. You can just have another movie that has Linda Hamilton in it, is produced by James Cameron, has a killer time-traveling robot, and there'll be some people who will be like, this is kind of like Terminator, and most people won't even notice all those connections.
No. It would be like, Sean, if every Star Wars movie after Empire Strikes Back had to ignore Luke, I am your father, and there's no Yoda. They had to take those two things and just they didn't happen. That's not a thing. it's like... And there's a reason Star Wars is an infinitely repeatable franchise and Terminator is not.
Yeah.
It's just so frustrating. And I still see people online, and I'm not trying to make fun of you, but I want everyone to open their eyes, being like, no, this Terminator will be the good one. And it's like, no.
We had the good Terminator. It was decades ago. Give up.
I don't think... Look, James... Everyone's also already forgotten. James Cameron was not technically a producer on Terminator Genisys, but he went out and stumped for that movie, and he said it's the best one since T2 and all this stuff. It's like, he's making 4 Avatar movies to the cost of $1 billion, which is the biggest, most insane project anyone's ever undertaken in Hollywood. He's not going to be working on this actively.
Yeah, he's not there every day on the set being like, this is going to be my vision for Terminator.
Yeah, Tim Miller is a talented director, but, a lot of talented directors have been thrown at Terminator or semi-talented and have bounced right off of it. So, I would not say Tim Miller has better credentials than Alan Taylor, who did Genisys, and Alan Taylor is an all-time great TV director. I feel like if anyone could do the kind of journeyman work you need to make a Terminator movie, he could do it, and Terminator Genisys is a limp, flaccid metal penis of a movie. It doesn't really matter who you have directing it. It's just... And I don't know. I wonder how much money they backed up into Linda Hamilton's driveway to get her to do this.
Or into her cave in the middle of the Himalayas.
Yeah. I love Linda Hamilton, but it's I'd also rather see her in something new.
It's just it's just so absurd. Because the other thing that is happening now with Terminator, that it's getting to the point where it's it's never going to make any sense anymore because it's a fucking franchise about time traveling where it's are we already... Is 2017 must already be past the point of when the fucking, apocalypse future was in the original Terminator, right? It's all fucked. None of it makes any more sense because of, the slow march of time just keeps on making the time travel antics utterly implausible I can't accept it.
It would be like if they made Back to the Future 4 today and they got Marty and Doc back, and now it's 2019, and it's well, wait, do we do the 2015 future from Back to the Future 2?
Yeah, does everyone have hoverboards and self-lacing shoes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I think, here's the thing, I would trust those guys to find a fun way around that. No one's going to find a fun way around this. It's just a bad idea. We're going to get another John Connor. Guess what? There's never been a cool John Connor. Edward Furlong was okay in Terminator 2 as a whiny kid.
Sure.
But all the other John Connors, and they've thrown some good... Christian Bale was John Connor, and you've forgotten it because Christian Bale's forgotten it because he was really bored in that movie, and the most exciting thing that happened was he swore at a dude on set, and that's the best thing that came out of Terminator Salvation. That was also the brief period where they tried to make Sam Worthington a thing after Avatar.
Yeah, talking about Avatar.
Yeah, so there you go. Terminator Salvation, bad. Terminator 3, okay. Terminator Genisys, really bad.
What if actually at the end of this new Terminator movie we find out that they're actually putting it all together and they're getting it's Terminator 3's in the continuity, Salvation, like Christian Bale and Sam Worthington show up at the end of the movie, the people, Game of Thrones people from Terminator Genisys and Sarah Connor Chronicles, there's a Game of Thrones people there too. They all show up.
Matt Smith was in Terminator Genisys. Did you know that?
Matt Smith is there, he shows up, but he's playing Doctor Who. It's not the character. It's also, there's a Doctor Who crossover. And there's 5 different Sarah Connors, and the next movie is called Terminator, The 5 Sarah Connors.
I mean...
And they have to go raid the Tomb of Rassilon.
If you just... the best thing you could possibly do for Terminator now is the Terminator parody movie. And frankly, it had already become that by the point of Genisys. So
yeah, it's just... It turns out, I just don't think you can make a franchise out of a fucking movie where the first movie is about how you can't defy fate. It's there's nowhere else, there's no more story to tell. It's like making Romeo and Juliet 2. You can't do it. It doesn't make any fucking sense. You can't do it. There's nothing to do.
Sean, I've got bad news for you. Did you know there is a show on network television this fall called Star-Crossed?
What?
That is Romeo and Juliet 2. It's from the perspective of... I'm not making this up. It's from the perspective of Rosalind, who was Romeo's love interest. And they're trying to put the pieces back together after Romeo and Juliet died and the houses are in shame. That is a show on network TV this fall.
Fuck us. Just fuck the human species. What are we doing? What else is there to talk about, Jonathan?
All right, let's do our first major topic, which is I wanted to talk about the Super NES Classic.
Okay, how is that? Because you actually got that, right? That's not some sort of like weird dream.
No, I got it.
Fancy. You haven't written the words like SNES Classic on a pillow and put it on your TV and pretended that you're playing it?
No, I have not. I have it. I've played Star Fox 2. I've played some Metroid. I've played some Mario. I've put a little like wallpaper around the screen for 5 minutes and then been like, this is cool. I like the black border, but I'm glad that's there for other people.
I was watching a video and there was like a wood grain border that I thought looked very classic.
They're very good. Like as those things go, they're not for me. They're really, and in fact, if we were to do like a Let's Play on it, I might put one of those on because I think they look better on YouTube with that. But yeah, anyway, I got a SNES Classic. Now, let's talk about, there's the product itself, and we'll talk about that. But of course, the story with this is also the thing itself coming out.
Yeah.
And that process. And I think the big surprise was it went okay.
This was a comedy, not a tragedy.
Yeah. It didn't go great. I'm not going to say, like, it's the best console. Like, you can just go in and buy one. But that would also be, like, that would just mean it didn't sell well.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, demand will always outrace supply on day one of something big.
Yeah.
You know? But it's how far it outraces it.
Yeah. It's like you didn't have to murder 5 people in the line at Best Buy to get your Super Nintendo.
Let me set the scene. And your first question might be, Jonathan, I remember somewhere in this saga you got a pre-order. And I will tell you what happened of that later because we're all waiting on to see what happened with that because the pre-orders continue to be a debacle.
Oh, okay. But I didn't even know that part.
No, I'll tell you that in a minute. But so I went to so let's set the scene. 1 year ago, last October, I went to Target at like 7:30 in the morning because they open at 8, and I wanted to get in line for the NES Classic. And back then, these were the more innocent days. We didn't know Trump was going to be president. We didn't know Nintendo was going to fuck up the NES Classic. We didn't know we might be calling the leader of North Korea Rocket Man. Mm-hmm. All these, it was a much more innocent time, right?
I remember it like it was 5 million years ago.
And I got in line, and I was the 7th or 8th person in line. This is not an exaggeration. 7th or 8th, and the person in front of me said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. They just came out and told me I'm the last one who gets one." And
then you stared them in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry, but you're not." And then you slit their throat and took their place.
And I've never been able to talk about that on the podcast because I would have to admit to
because, I mean, it was October 2016, so you were already playing Hitman at that point. You were trained.
That's true. Deadly. Anyway, what I did is, Sean, I moved behind a little pillar and I threw a coin.
Yeah.
And then I killed
you were going to, but then you realized, oh no, it's 2016. Nobody carries change anymore. My plan is foiled.
Anyway, but yeah, so like 7 of 8 people, I got fucked. There was none left. They had like 7 units in stock, which is pathetic, obviously, because this is a big Target in our area.
Yeah.
This isn't like some mom and pop shop. Anyway, fast forward a year later, I went to Target. I'd actually stopped at Best Buy first, and they had a whole fuck up. But anyway. Went to Target. I got in line at Target at like 6:50, 7 a.m., somewhere in there. I was 29th in line, but I had seen online it looked like this Target was going to get an inventory of around 70, and that turned out to be the case because I was 29th in line, and I know that because they gave numbered tickets out at a certain point, and there were at least another 30 people behind me, and every one of us got a Super NES. And it was super easy, and we went in, and they Target was on the ball, and they had like a bunch of registers set up, and they had all the SNESs like lined up. So I was home by 8:30 with my Super NES, and I played some Mario World, and it was much more pleasant than the process a year ago. And I just let's put this in context, Sean. They had around 7 last year. This Target had 70 this year. So Reggie wasn't lying. They did make more of these.
I'm happy that I can keep my faith in Reggie, that he's not lying to me.
No, they did make quite a few more of these. That is a factor of at least tenfold for this one store, and maybe for the whole production line, because these did sell out everywhere, but the general consensus I saw online was that if you got there a reasonable amount of time early, and you didn't have to be there 3 hours early, just like an hour, half an hour early, you probably got one. And you were probably good, And it's like, that's how it should be. And you're not going to be able to go into a store and buy one on the shelf right away, but you probably will be able to at some point. And again, it is new hardware on day one. That's how this works.
Yeah.
But again, those who were, dedicated and went out and got one, they were fine. So all is well that ends well, I guess, unless you pre-ordered and were relying on that. Because you might get one, but you're going to have to wait a week or two.
Uh-huh.
Because, let's see. So the two, Best Buy was okay. I know Best Buy had Best Buy actually, some people got theirs early from Best Buy. So
there you go.
Best Buy did a good job on their online pre-orders. Walmart has given me a tracking number. From what I can tell, it still has not left Indiana, which is where their warehouse is. and they're still saying it will not come to me until next Friday. Meanwhile, you could have gone into a Walmart and gotten them at midnight on the 29th. So that's weird. That's not really how I think of pre-ordering, but I will have an extra SNES Classic.
Well, there you go.
If anyone wants it, I'll sell it to you at cost. I don't, it'll put some good karma in the world. But yeah, so if that actually comes, I should say.
Yeah.
I don't.
Who knows? Again,
know.
You might get the box and then open it up, and there's the pillow with SNES Classic written on it.
And to be fair, I also heard a lot of people had their Walmart pre-orders canceled at midnight the day of. So Walmart they really fucked up their pre-orders. Amazon still has not shipped any of their pre-orders. They still have not updated people. I've read on threads, people have got in touch with Amazon customer service and dug far enough, and they're saying they will come second week of October. Meanwhile, Amazon was selling them in certain cities in their in-person locations. So I don't know what Amazon is doing. Frankly, you should never go to Amazon for hardware because that's one thing they are spectacularly bad at selling. Yeah. So especially near launch. Otherwise, Amazon can be good for things, just not that. But yeah, so if you pre-ordered online and were expecting to get it day of, and you didn't do Best Buy, that didn't happen. So that's kind of weird, but I was able to go get it in store, and I have my SNES Classic. So the saga has a not perfect ending, not a great ending, but a good one. It's
a reasonably satisfactory ending. Let's categorize it that way.
Yes, absolutely. Like the end of Terminator 2.
Exactly. There you go.
All right. Anyway, so let's talk about the thing itself.
Okay.
I mean, you all know what this thing is. It's a little Super NES. It comes with 2 controllers. It's got 21 games installed. One of those games is Star Fox 2, which was never released. So it's a 21-year-old Super NES game that is just seeing the light of day.
There you go.
You can emulate. They're all obviously running through emulation. You can have 4 save states that you can work with. You've got different display options. So like we said, there are, I think, 20 borders they have on this. And there are some fun ones. You talked about the wood grain one that's cool. There's one that is this big Nintendo boombox thing with speakers. That, yeah. And I did play some Mario World like that, and it just kind of made me laugh because I like the idea of a Nintendo TV unit like that you just use to play old games. So anyway, those are funny. It's got 3 display options. There's just normal 4:3, which is running the game in whatever its original aspect ratio was. Which one of the things that when you play through these games, you realize Super Nintendo games would vary their screen space a lot for different programming reasons. Star Fox takes up a lot less space because I guess they couldn't program out to the edges and stuff like that. Well,
I think that's probably for frame rate reasons more than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, so things like that. But anyway, so you got 4:3. You can do 4:3 with a little CRT filter. And I have to say, I don't usually like those fake CRT filters, and it's still not ever going to be my preferred way to play these. But this is a much more subtle and realistic CRT filter than I've ever seen. If you like that kind of thing, it adds that kind of fuzziness without obscuring it too much, and it doesn't feel like they're ladling it on thick. It actually kind of looks like a CRT. So if you like that kind of thing, it's good. And then they have a pixel perfect mode, which I do not like, which makes every pixel like a perfect square and makes the game look really tall and squeezed.
Yeah, because I think that's how they were programmed to that's how the pixels are supposed to sort of display internally, but it would always be stretched out to 4:3 by the TV.
Yeah,
and so those games are actually supposed to look like 4:3.
Right. It's a cool option to have. I mean, if for no other reason than you can kind of look at the art in interesting ways, but I don't think it certainly if you were to turn that on something like a Star Fox or a Donkey Kong Country, like a faux 3D one, that would look really weird. Yeah. So
just a tall, skinny Donkey Kong, you're ugh.
Anyway, but yeah. So those are kind of your setup options. It comes out of the box. It's got a bunch of cables that I wound up not needing to use because I actually found the setup of this is really easy. It's powered by micro USB. So I have a micro USB cord coming out of my Xbox that I use to charge my controllers, and I just plug it into that. And so I don't have to do anything special, and it is completely powered off of that because it takes a very low power usage. So you can just power it from any USB port you have around, and I think that's actually good if you have one kind of coming across your living room like I do. Xbox, PlayStation, or even your TV. TVs have powered USB ports now. That actually might be a better way to do it because you don't have extra cords running. And then I had a long HDMI cable, and I just brought that over and plugged that in, and then I have the system right next to me because you do kind of have to have that. Because the power and reset buttons are on the console itself. You have to hit reset to go back to the menu and activate your save states and stuff. And if you have the console right next to you, it's not a problem at all. I actually kind of like that because it allows them to have their nice replica controllers. And then you just, move your hand over and click that button. And it's kind of fun because it's like a old-timey switch where you move it up and it, you have to flick it a little bit. And that's kind of fun. So, that's how that works. And then the controllers plug in. The controller wires are 5 feet long. Again, if you have the console near you, which is clearly how it's intended to be, whether or not we can just debate whether that's a good choice, but that is clearly the intention, then that's a perfectly fine length. Again, clearly this thing is not meant to be on the other side of a big living room.
Right.
Because you would have to get a shit ton of extension cords and stuff. They give you 2 Super Nintendo controllers with it. They're both identical. They both end in the Wiimote connector, which I don't quite know why they're still using that. It's fine.
Yeah.
There's no problem with it, and it is
it's because they didn't use USB in 2006, so they're like, well, we're stuck with this if you wanted, because it does allow you, like you said, you can plug it in
to your Wii.
Yeah, play Wii Virtual Console games.
Which at the moment is frankly a more useful use for it because there is no Virtual Console on the Switch, so what would you use it for?
Right.
So I do kind of like that, but one day let's say the Switch does get a bunch of Virtual Console, then you might wish these ended in USB-C or something, but it's okay. It's fine out of the box. It's good. So you get the 2 controllers, you get the console. It also comes with a poster, and it gives you an HDMI cord and a wall charger and a USB port and all that. I haven't taken any of that out of the box because I didn't need it. I have a lot of extra HDMI cords at this point.
Yeah, you just accumulate those things somehow, don't you?
Yes. Anyway, so yeah, and then, the best thing about the Super Nintendo Classic, though, to me, is that it's a really nice, clean UI and system and everything that allows you to, and the system itself, that allows you to just get into your games and play, and all of the other stuff melts away. And, I've played several of the different games, but the one I've really, sunk my teeth into is the first game I'm trying to beat is Super Metroid. And I'm doing that because I love Super Metroid, but also Metroid Samus Returns just came out, and I loved that. And Super Metroid is the, sequel to that, sort of, because Samus Returns is a remake of Metroid 2.
Right. But in terms of the narrative chronology of Metroid.
Yeah. So this is, kind of the next one narratively. So it's been fun to and I haven't played that game in years, so it's fun to revisit that. And that's definitely a game that puts it all through its paces. And it's so fun to play on it because it's a very simple console, so it's all really fast. You flip the power switch on and you are there. You can get into your game in a matter of seconds. It all loads very fast because these are old, cartridge style games. And then you're playing it. It's the controllers I love. I've always loved the Super NES controller. I didn't have one as a kid, but I have had the knockoff. Yeah, I've had those. I do own at somewhere a knockoff Super NES that I had in middle and high school that I would play some old carts. I would get at used game stores and stuff. And I never had a good Super Nintendo controller, but I had knockoffs. But I've always liked that general design. And of course, that design is the basis for every controller afterwards. Right. And these are from what I can tell and what people have said, perfect replicas of the original Super Nintendo controllers. Different wires, obviously, but otherwise the gamepad itself is the same. And it's a great pad to play these on. There's something about playing a game like Super Metroid or Mario World or Link to the Past or something on the controller it was made for. That's interesting. You see some of the logic in different choices more obviously. Some things just feel better in that way. So I'm enjoying that. The D-pad is... I love the D-pad on this because... I've been playing the Switch a lot, and the Switch, I like the actually separated D-pad on the Joy-Con actually is fine for me. The one on the Pro controller is a little too slippery, but this is nice solid D-pad which these games need. So it's fun to play it with that original controller. Use your save states if you need them here and there. I really with Super Metroid you don't really need to do that because it's got a robust save system in the game. But once in a while it'll be there's a really hard jump to make here. And I'm not going to spend an hour doing it like I would when I was a kid. So let's just make a save here. And you can do that. But yeah, it really all sinks away and you get to play these games. And the best thing about it is this is the absolute best presentation any of these games has had. The emulation on these looks astonishingly good. I thought they looked good on the Wii U, the Super NES games that I've played on there. They're colorful and bright. But this is a notch above that. Everything just looks so crisp and clean and clear, and the colors are super, bright and vivid. Not inaccurately, they just look they really pop off the screen. It all looks, like I said, very sharp, very clear. Super Metroid, you've got your nice deep blacks for part of that game that really need it, and colors when you need it. Super Mario World, which was the first one I booted up when I got the system, because if you bought a Super Nintendo in 1991, that's the first one you would boot up. So everything just looks great and plays well, and you get to play them on the original replica controller. So I guess my verdict on the Super Nintendo so far would be, if you like any of these games, and I don't know who wouldn't like some of these games. Sure. This lineup has some of the best games ever made on it. Then I think this is probably worth it. If there are at least a handful of ones on here you would really like to play again, this is the best presentation they've ever had. I've also looked at emulations of these on my Mac, for instance, of A Link to the Past. None of them look as good as this does. This is a really polished, really good presentation. And, if you can get your hands on one, out of the box, it's just such an easy experience to set up because they've given you 2 controllers and everything you need. You're never going to have to go buy more stuff for it. It's just there. It's these 21 games. I do have some complaints about the lineup. I think it's a good lineup. There's there's some games I know, like some people hate Super Ghouls and Ghosts. I've never played it, so I don't have an opinion on that. Maybe I'll try it out at some point. But overall, there's not too many obvious duds or filler titles. There's a lot of great ones. I do wish they had filled it out a little bit more. I feel like the most obvious omissions are Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 because it wouldn't hurt. Nintendo owns those. That's no
So it's
effort.
only Donkey Kong Country 1?
Yeah. Which is a
I
little
think
weird.
2 is the only one I played a lot of.
And a lot of people think 2 is better. I have not played the sequels.
Well, because 2 you can play as Dixie and Diddy, right?
Yeah.
And 1 is just Donkey and Diddy?
Yeah. So 2 is called, I think, Diddy Kong's Adventure or something.
Yeah.
So it's just that one's weird to me because Nintendo owns those games. They don't have to license those out.
Yeah, and it's not like there's not enough space or something to put some more Super Nintendo games on that thing.
So those 2 I wish were on there. Those are easy gimmies, I feel like. 2 Square titles I wish... There's a good sampling of Square Enix ones on here. You get Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy 3, 6, but it's called 3 on here. And Secret of... Did I say Secret of Mana? Yes.
Yeah.
You get those 2. What's the other Square RPG
Super
on
Mario RPG?
Super Mario RPG. That's the one, yeah. I wish Final Fantasy 2 was on here, 4, and Chrono Trigger. I was like, why is Chrono Trigger not on there? That's a big one. So those 2, and then if I were to round it out, 5 titles I would add. Those 4 I mentioned, plus I would love Super Mario All-Stars on here, because I love that game. And again, would be no effort on Nintendo's part to put that on there, although I know they're kind of stingy with that game because it's a re-release thing and blah, blah, blah. But it would be cool to have. But those 5 titles aside, the 21 on here are very, very good. It's got, the holy trinity, obviously, of Super Metroid, Link to the Past, and Super Mario World, and a lot of other good things. Final Fantasy VI is actually a game that's kind of hard to find a good version of these days.
Yeah, there's so many different versions of that game that all have their own weird issues.
Yeah, but I think people generally agree the Super Nintendo one is kind of still the definitive edition, so you get that here, and it'll say 3 at the beginning, but, nice nostalgia to when we were not good about numbering our games.
Sure, yeah. It's something where it's you kind of just wish, he could have just come on, because it's become such a pain in the ass sometimes with people.
Yeah.
It's just Final Fantasy VI. We have to live in the world where we can just call it Final Fantasy VI, please.
And I think it's got a good assortment of other types of games too. It's got a little bit of everything the Super Nintendo was known for. You've got your Street Fighter 2 on here. You got Super Punch-Out. You've got Castlevania 4, that's a game I've always wanted to play, and that's on here. And I played the first level of that, and God, the music is so good.
Castlevania has some real good music.
Yeah, and you get to do the cool trick with your whip and things. It's got Super Mario Kart, which is not my favorite Mario Kart or anything, but obviously should be on the system.
Yeah.
And I made myself play half an hour of that and get into it, and it's really interesting to play that game and be right, this is a game where it's a 3D perspective and that you're moving through it, but literally everything in the world is 2D.
Right.
So all the barriers and everything and all the item blocks are just flat images on the ground.
Yeah, it's always the coins are the ones that look the craziest to me because it just looks like a coin sticker that someone put on this road and then you run over it and just pops up. You're
Yeah.
I guess I collected that coin.
Once you get into it, it's fun, and obviously you couldn't put this system out without that on there.
Yeah.
You got F-Zero, which is another racing one that's interesting. The Star Fox games. I think it's a really good assortment of games that are utterly timeless, like A Link to the Past, and games that are obviously not timeless, but I think you want there for, history's sake.
Right.
And then I think some deeper cuts, like the 2 Kirby games they included. I probably would have picked Kirby's Dream Land 3 if I were putting one on there, but they did not do that one. They did Kirby's Dream Course, which is a Kirby golf game.
Yeah.
Which, hey, I would never have known about that game if they didn't put it on here, so I'm happy about that. It seems kind of fun. And Kirby's Superstar, which is the 8-in-1 game that's a really cool, different kind of Kirby game where it's technically a set of mini games, but there's a lot to do in there. It almost feels like a precursor of something like Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube. So yeah, some fun deep cuts. And then you do have Star Fox 2, which, if nothing else, was going to be a really interesting historical artifact.
Right.
And I did play that game today. It's like Star Fox 1 in that you can... Star Fox 1 and Star Fox 64 and Star Fox 64 3D and Star Fox Zero on Wii U, all the remakes of the original Star Fox.
But not like Star Fox Adventures, the secret best Star Fox game.
In that, what I was going to say is that in that you can like beat the campaign in 30 minutes to an hour.
Right.
And it's an arcade kind of thing where you go back through and you do different paths and you see different things and you do different difficulties. So it's meant to be a game like you play over and over. But I did do one full playthrough of Star Fox 2, and I think it's more than just a historical curiosity. I don't think it's necessarily a great game that you need to rush out and, shiv someone to get your Super NES Classic so you can have this game in your life. But it is, if you have any affection for Star Fox at all, it's really interesting because Star Fox is a series that has been very stale for a very long time, and that pretty much the Super Nintendo game is the format, and they've just remade it over and over again, and it's fun. But they very rarely have gone bigger than that. One of the only exceptions being something like Star Fox Adventure, which really isn't a Star Fox game.
Yeah, no, it's like a 3D character platformer that has Star Fox characters shoved into it for reasons that nobody understands.
Literally, because that's the last game Rare made with Nintendo, and I still have my original GameCube box, and on the back is advertised a game called Dinosaur Planet.
Yeah.
And it's like, Dinosaur Planet looks cool. And by the time the GameCube actually got into stores, Nintendo had told Rare, you can finish the game, but only if you make it a Star Fox game. And so they had to shoehorn Star Fox characters in. And when Dinosaur Planet came out, it was Star Fox Adventure.
Well, I mean, because there's two things you know Star Fox for. It's piloting a spaceship and fighting dinosaurs with a staff. Those are the two things he does. Those are the two things he's known for. Ever since Star Fox 1, he's flying a starship, fighting dinosaurs with a staff.
Yes.
It's a strong identity for that character.
But anyway, so Star Fox has never really iterated on itself enough. And Star Fox 2 is a sequel in that it takes all the raw materials and comes up with new directions to take them. And that's cool. That's exciting. Like, even 21 years after this was supposed to come out, there's something really fresh about it. Because the whole pitch is Andros, the villain, has come back. He's threatening Corneria. And the game is all like, the main screen is like this, almost like a real-time strategy screen, where you have this whole galaxy map. It also reminds me a lot of things like Mass Effect and some modern space games like that. And Corneria is in the lower left-hand corner. In the top right-hand corner is Andros. And you're going to have to get across there, but there's also a meter of how much damage the planet of Corneria has taken. So you have to go navigate the galaxy, and when you make a move, enemies on the map will also start moving. And so you have to keep that in mind as you go around and be very strategic. And, you can pick your objectives in any order you want to do. Obviously, there are orders that will get you killed, and you shouldn't do that, but you can do them in different orders. And so you might go take this base, and then once you've taken that base, they cannot attack Corneria anymore. You might see that a missile or a couple of fighters are headed towards Corneria, so you go there and have a dogfight with them. And within that, like, it's a game with a lot of gameplay variety, because there's some of the classic Star Fox, you're just in the R-Wing shooting, but then it also has a lot of first-person perspective in the R-Wing. It has a thing where the R-Wing transforms into a walker and walks around, and that's kind of cool. There's these almost like platformer, like light platforming puzzle things with that, where you have to hit some switches to be able to advance in the level. It's really an interesting game, and it's got great music. It, for the time, is really graphically impressive. I know the Star Fox polygons don't look great today,
right,
but there is something like, you look at Star Fox 2, I'm like, this was going to run on the Super Nintendo? That's crazy. Because it's way more advanced than Star Fox 1 was in terms of all the stuff they've added. And yeah, you do have to get your head around it a little bit. This is not a modern 3D game. This is not even a N64 style 3D game. But I do think it's interesting. And I look forward to playing it again. Like, I look forward to seeing, like, what other paths can I take. You can choose basically a pilot and a co-pilot, and they've added, so there's the original 4 characters, Falco and Slippy and all those. Yeah. But you've also got 2 new characters, one named Miyu and one named something else, and they're like
Yumi.
And they're a female fox and a female cat or something, and you can play around with them. And so I did it. My first one, I did Fox and Miyu together in a ship, and you can they're not together in a ship. They have 2 different ships, and so the other one is called your wingman, which I kind of like.
Sure.
And so you can switch between them. So like if Fox is low on health, you can go play as Miyu, and they have some different abilities, so you can like mix and match character types and whatnot. But Star Fox 2 is good. It's a cool game. It's really interesting, and if you're going to get a Super Nintendo Classic, I definitely recommend checking it out, because it's a really cool, both historical curiosity and, hey, it's a pretty good game. And if you like Star Fox, you look at this and be like, how has Nintendo not done more with these ideas in the 21 years since this was made and shelved?
The thing about Star Fox that always just sort of seems crazy to me is that it was never an arcade game. because so much of the structure of that game is like Star Fox 64 in particular is like, this would have been the most amazing arcade game, and it's a great game to rent or have a friend that has that game, because you just go to their house and play it. But it's like, when I bought Star Fox 64, I was like, this is not a game I would buy, because you can finish it in like 30 minutes, and you can go and do different routes, but that's not as satisfying as like just having a long game.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's such a great game for like, if you put in a couple of quarters and you can play until you die, and every time you go to the arcade and you play it, you can pick a different route. What an awesome design for an arcade game, but it was literally never an arcade game.
That's why the best version of it is the one on the 3DS, because the 3D really makes it feel like a big arcade game, like the kinds where you would get in and it would have like a big screen going on, and it's really immersive. And like, on a portable, doing like the 30-minute runs feels a little better, and you don't feel as cheated.
Yeah, whereas when I bought Star Fox 64 and I put it in and sat down on my TV and then I beat it, it was like, oh, right, like this game, like I already played this game at my friend's house. Why did I buy this game? Like, it was super fun then, but that was the game.
Yep. But it's actually makes Star Fox 1 and 2, I think, really good titles on the SNES Classic, because they're really good to just do a run in between other games you're playing.
Sure.
Because there are games on this system that will take you a very long time to beat. Final Fantasy 3 is no slouch in the length department. And, even, Mario World and Link to the Past and Super Metroid are all pretty hefty, all the first-party Nintendo ones. So sometimes it's fun to have some of these that you can just go in and do a round in or something. I tried Super Punch-Out earlier today. And I've never seen that version of Punch-Out.
Yeah,
it's like the
I feel
lesser
like
known.
Nobody ever talks about that game.
It was fun. I had to figure out the controls on the fly and realized, like, oh man, they did put out the manuals for these, and I downloaded the PDFs, and they're really cool. I do wish you could access the manuals on the system, because some of these games you do, like, it brought me back to my childhood when, like, I had to get the manual out and figure out what the controls are.
It's like there were just no tutorials back then.
Yeah, so, but it's interesting. It's a really cool device. As I said, if you have fondness for many of these games or are just interested in many of these games, at $80, I think, could it be better in some ways? Sure, but this is the best way to play a lot of the best games ever made. That makes it a pretty special product. So, Also, it is fucking tiny. And I know everyone's been talking about that, and I know you've heard that about the NES Classic as well, but until you actually hold it in your hands and realize it is smaller than your hand, like, Sean, your Blade Runner DVD case there, it's like half the size of that. Mm-hmm. It's insanely small, and it's very cute. So it's nice. You also realize, like, it's got the faux controller ports on the front that you have to pull out, and then you can use the Wii controller ports. And it's like, right, the SNES had giant controller ports, and in no way could they have fit those on here. So they have to do these little reproductions to try to make it look good. But anyway, it's a cool device. I like it.
I will say, like, based on the video I saw, that just sort of like is an overview of some of what it was. My favorite detail is that the games are listed in alphabetical order. So the first game that pops up when you turn it on is fucking Contra 3, which is the last game you would expect. It's like, I just thought when I watched that video and I saw it's like there's an unboxing and they put it in and they plugged it on. It was like Contra 3's right in the middle of the screen. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Did you buy the right thing?
It means that actually, like, alphabetically, a lot of the biggest games are grouped near the end.
Yeah, because it's all the super stuff.
Yep. So, and the one weird detail about the alphabetization, too, is they didn't account for the in The Legend of Zelda. So it's not under L, it's under T.
Oh, that's weird.
Which is weird to me. Like, I looked for it under L, and then I was like, well, why isn't it there? And I scrolled down, it's like, oh, it's past the S's.
Yeah, that's against the rules of how you alphabetize stuff. That's just wrong.
So who knows? But yeah, the game is there, and it's good, so... Yeah.
I mean, if the thing you're most excited for in getting your tiny Super Nintendo is playing Contra 3, it is right there for you immediately. You just fucking flip that switch and mash the A button and you're right in there.
Yes. I played about a minute of it and died and got a game over because I have never really played Contra.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever played Contra 3. I only ever played like the arcade version of Contra 1. Yeah. Those games are hard.
Yes, they are. But that's why you got the save states on this one.
Sure, yeah.
But it's also that's also a good co-op game. It's another reason I'm glad they have the second controller in there.
Yeah, that's nice.
So yeah. Anyway, that's the Super NES Classic. Sean, do you want to move on to our main topic for tonight?
What's our main topic for tonight, Jonathan? Remind me. I can't figure out what it is just looking in front of me. What was the thing we're going to talk about?
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner.
Sean, so we're going to talk about Blade Runner from here on out. It is, to me, one of the greatest movies ever made. Once upon a time, I had it in my top 10 films of all time list. When I did that this year, it was not on there, mostly because I did make that internal decision that I was going to do like 10 new films.
Right.
Although I was watching the movie again this week, and I was like, oh man, this is at least in my top 20.
Yeah, I was kind of having that thought also. It's like, maybe this or Ghost in the Shell is like, because they're also very similar movies in a lot of ways. Like, maybe I should have, if I had rewatched Blade Runner, that would have been a way harder choice for me.
Because here's the thing about Blade Runner for me. Blade Runner is one of the first movies I ever became obsessed with. And I was obsessed. You can attest to this. I was obsessed with this movie in high school. And I was obsessed with it on an academic level. It wasn't just like, one of my older obsessions like Back to the Future. There was like super entertaining movie that I enjoyed watching. Blade Runner was a movie that like I devoured this box set when it came out because I wanted to know everything about the production. I read books on this movie. I've read the Philip K. Dick novel. I even did a project in my freshman year of high school where we had to do something, and I wrote a screenplay based on the original Philip K. Dick novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, because it's pretty much nothing like the movie Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And that's what I did, because it's like some project, and it's like, I don't really want to do whatever the assignment was, so I'll do my own version of the assignment.
I think for that assignment, I did a first-person journal from the perspective of the main character, Winston, from 1984, over the course of that story.
Nice.
And I think I kind of disturbed that teacher. Because it's like, it's a really fucking dark book, and that character, as you might imagine, goes on quite a journey over the course of that story.
Yes. Yeah. I also, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a pretty explicit book, and I kept all that stuff in, so we both freaked out that teacher. But,
It was a good freshman year. It was a good... They set up that institution to know what they were dealing with.
Yes. But it's a miracle we made it all 4 years.
That's actually true.
Anyway, but yeah, so like, I love this movie. Like, I was reminiscing because I showed this to my brother, who he had seen this with me at some point when I was a teenager, and he was too young to see Blade Runner and appreciate it, because one thing you should know about this movie, if you've never seen it, is it's probably not what you expect.
Right.
It's not what anyone expected at the time or later. It is its own fucking thing. There's really never been a movie like it. There are some analogs you could go with, I think, in terms of some themes and visuals, but I think in terms of the specific tone and style, it is really its own thing. And so anyway, I was showing it to my brother for the first time where he was actually an adult seeing this movie.
Right.
And I was reminiscing, like, the first time I saw this movie would have been back when the only DVD was the non-anamorphic DVD of the director's cut that was like, literally that was the first DVD released. It was that and a couple others. Like, the day DVDs came out, that was one of the first DVDs. And I would rent that from Netflix, back when Netflix, you got the discs, over and over again. And then I finally, when they put out a better DVD, I owned that. And then they put out this big box set in 2007. And that was my thing that year, was Blade. And I actually had that on HD DVD first.
Right, yeah.
That was a thing back then.
There you go. You made the right choice.
I did not. I have since replaced that with the Blu-ray sets. So pretty much the same thing, just now on something you can actually put in a player and expect to play, which HD DVD you could not. Yeah. So, yeah, Blade Runner was just this movie that I was, as I said, I think was one of the things that got me really opening my eyes to cinema as an art form. Because it is this intersection of, Blade Runner is a piece of 80s nostalgia, and it is in this interesting, 80s film movement, but it is not like other films of the period. I think if this came out today, we would call it an art film. This would not be a movie that would go wide to 4,000 theaters, Right. In fact, it's kind of laughable, that idea. And even at the time, of course, it was severely tampered with in theaters, and that version is severely compromised, I think. And Blade Runner is also, to me, though, one of the rare movies that I really loved as a kid and in high school. And I got through, 4 or 5 years of film school. I have 2 degrees, and I love it maybe even more now, or I respect it even more now. It is a movie that I think the more you watch it and the more you learn just about film as an art, the more you look at this and it's like, this movie is like a little miracle of a film that this got made. And very much a good companion piece to the other early Ridley Scott movie we like to talk about, Alien, in that they are both weird, different, out of the mainstream movies, and not really a signal of the filmmaker Ridley Scott would become. And I'm not putting him down. I love Ridley Scott as a filmmaker, but the Ridley Scott when Ridley Scott was rumored to be like, maybe he was going to direct this new Blade Runner sequel, I dreaded that because he's not the same guy who made this movie. Yeah. I think Prometheus is almost like evidence of that, you wouldn't be getting the right guy for that anymore. But yeah, I'm rambling. That's my relationship with Blade Runner. Sean.
Yeah, I don't, mine is not really that different than yours. I think it's more just like in high school, I was not as obsessed with it as you were. But obviously I really liked it because I did see the director's cut version on that old DVD because my mom loves this movie to death. So I saw that version. And then in 2007, when this ridiculous box set came out, I got this one, so I got the DVD, the original fucking DVD version, which still looks fucking great.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like one of those things of like, you were like, right, DVDs still look fucking awesome, and you kind of forget that sometimes.
DVDs can hold up surprisingly well.
Yeah. But yeah, so like when this version came out, this sort of like massive release that had the big new cut of the movie called the final cut, and then it had the old director's cut version, and then the original theatrical version, which I had never seen those, and then the work print that I had obviously never seen that. And all that, and like it was just like in a couple of weeks, I watched all of those versions of the movies. I think the only one that I'm not sure if I watched or not was that they have like the uncensored international theatrical version and the like original like American theatrical version.
Yeah.
I don't know if I watched both of those. I do not remember. But I just like watched the shit out of this movie. I watched all the bonus features because this is also like, you know, in my memory, it's kind of more around that like when you having the Lord of the Rings box sets and stuff like that. Like,
this was the heyday of the DVD box set, and the guy who put this box set together, and any version of Blade Runner you get now, and was even the producer on the final cut, is Charles de Lauzarica, who is a big name in this industry because all of like the best. Lord of the Rings is a different guy, but many of the best like DVD sets and the DVD making of features, he was the guy. He still is like the last guy standing who makes those, because this kind of special edition just doesn't get done anymore.
Yeah.
But he and Ridley Scott still work together. So like, I don't love Prometheus. The special edition for that movie is amazing, and that's all Charles de Lauzarica. So yeah.
Yeah. Because it's just one of those things of watching. I loved all the bonus features and seeing like, I particularly just loved all the weird drama that existed on the set with like Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott and stuff, and how much you just felt like Harrison Ford hated working on this movie. It was just a dreadful fucking experience. And when you watch the movie, you can really understand why. It does not feel like it seemed like a pleasant experience as an actor to be rained on constantly and fucking thrown through glass and all this shit.
I think the modern equivalent would be like Tom Hardy in Fury Road.
Yeah.
Of like an actor who wound up giving a great performance. The movie is great around them, but you can tell they must have been miserable on set.
But like Rick Deckard is a miserable fucking human being,
he is.
So I think it helps inform the performance a lot. But yeah, but devouring all those like interesting special features, Blade Runner for me is like with Lord of the Rings. Like half of my enjoyment, especially like in high school, was the movie, and then the other half was seeing and like getting that window into how all this stuff was made, because it was that, you know, it's that kind of thing when you're growing up and you start to sort of more intellectualize that process and realize, right, like this is not just a thing that is dropped into my lap and like this movie just exists. It's this whole incredible process that involves so many different things, and there's a lot of the obvious ones like the director and the actors, but the stuff you don't think about, like the concept artists and like Vangelis who did the soundtrack and all that stuff of like all the other different parts of the movies, even the parts that you don't see, like the editing and stuff that you're not cognizant of. Getting a window into that stuff, it sort of, you know, I found that so fascinating. But the thing that I found really interesting about rewatching it for preparation for the day's podcast is I realized I hadn't seen the movie since high school, and so I have changed so much since then. I got so much more out of the movie this time, and there are a couple of like really fundamental things about my reading of the movie in high school that I now completely disagree with, and I'm like 180 on, that I was really not expecting. Like I did not go into it thinking like, oh, I'm like my understanding of this movie is going to be, I'm not going to say like completely different, but pretty significantly different in some major ways in specific parts of the movie. That I was like, oh, right, shit, Blade Runner is, like, it's something that I had kind of taken for granted how good Blade Runner is, because I just hadn't watched it for so long, that watching it, it's like, right, this is not just a good movie, this is an amazing movie.
Yeah, no, and this is, so I've seen it more recently than you have. I go back to it at least every couple of years, but it had been a couple of years, you know, probably since sometime in film school. And, you know, I think my reading of the movie has evolved more gradually just because I've seen it more times over the years. But I've had that same experience with it. And this one for me was also like, it was a little transformative to realize, like, to me, watching it this time, I tweeted a little bit about this. Blade Runner to me today plays like a dream sequence. The movie feels like a 2-hour dream sequence, complete with the dive into full-on REM sleep nightmare in the last half hour, which, like, I think if you read it that way, the pace of this movie makes more sense. Not that I'm saying it's like a David Lynch thing where, like, they're literally dreaming or something.
Right.
It's just, I think it has that kind of aesthetic.
Yeah.
Where, and actually maybe David Lynch is a good comparison in some ways for that, because he very rarely gives you a dreamer. It's just that kind of aesthetic. And I do think it, you know, because this is a movie that is 99 to 100% atmosphere.
Yeah.
There is a story. Does it matter? Not really. It's one of the reasons why the narration is a horrible thing in the theatrical cut, because that's so not the fucking point. This is a movie you bathe in, and you feel a little dirty bathing in it because it's a grimy, fucking broken world, but also beautiful and different and alien, and also very recognizable in some ways. And it feels like, there's so many pieces of like logic that probably don't hold up if you look at it in certain ways, but it is about this, like I said, this kind of dream mentality where it's like these characters almost floating through this world, and things get more nightmarish at certain points. And I also think there's something about it to me that one of the ways my reading has evolved is that, and we'll talk about, because one of my biggest evolutions is on that question everyone likes to ask is Deckard a replicant?
Yeah, same with me.
And to me, part of the interesting thing about how I answer that question is I think one of the ways to look at this movie is it feels like a movie about it's a refracted psyche. Like there is... Every character feels like part of one big character to me in this movie in a weird way. Where, if you actually break it down, Rick Deckard is not the driving force of the action in this movie. In fact, there's a big stretch in the middle where he is drunk on the couch and fucking Sean Young and not doing anything to the main... the Rutger Hauer character, Roy Batty, is much more active in almost a traditional protagonist way in the film. And yet, when they come together at the end, it doesn't feel to me almost like two characters in a thematic squaring off. It almost feels like this meeting of the minds, and these people, like Rick, obviously he's learning something about himself, but it's like these different anxieties in this character playing out through all these different bodies. There's so many ways to read it where if you take it on just, what's the story is like one sentence. That he's a retired Blade Runner, and there's some loose replicants, and they may or may not be up to no good, and he's got to go kill him, and he does kill him, and then he runs away.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And he might be a replicant. You can throw that little thing, is like, ooh.
Yeah, and there's kind of a love story, and it's kind of rapey. And
more than kind of.
It's very rapey.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways to pick this movie apart, and I think one of the things that is one of the biggest evolutions I've seen is just how much this really does play like a vestigial organ of like the 70s, the late 70s, where you had all these directors coming into their own, and kind of out of the early 70s auteur movement, and now the auteur movement is meeting the blockbuster movement, and you get something like Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters, or Ridley Scott's first Alien, where you had these immensely talented filmmakers who would go on to be really big blockbuster names, but in the beginning of their career were basically making these artistic statements of movies, not polished Hollywood blockbusters.
But also, there's a part of it that they were also genre movies. Alien is a science fiction and horror movie. Blade Runner is a science fiction, science fiction movie. I mean, it is the origin of cyberpunk in so many ways.
Absolutely, and it's such a unique moment in film history because it really only lasts a couple of years. But it's this intersection between what was, big and popular, because we're still in the, fallout of Star Wars at this point, and science fiction is big, and so any of these movies will get funded. Right. But also this film school, early American auteur movement, and I think you see some really fascinating collisions. And Blade Runner is a great example because the story of the making of this movie, this is kind of like Apocalypse Now, where the story behind the making of it is almost as exciting as the film itself, because no one really agreed what movie they were making. Everyone was miserable. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Somehow it all miraculously came together, and then the studio said, you have to have Harrison Ford do narration in a weird Texas drawl, and you have to add footage from the beginning of The Shining to the end of the movie to make the most tacked-on happy ending in the history of film.
And it's the most amazing ending when, you watch the movie again, because I haven't seen that version since high school. Because, I haven't watched the movie since high school. And there's something so amazing about watching the Final Cut version because I watched it last night from recording this podcast, and thinking about the ending of that fucking theatrical version is so amazing. It's so it's literally like if you went to the negative universe and the Negaverse version of Blade Runner, that's where they pulled that ending from. It is so the opposite in 100%, every single way is the opposite of that movie.
Well, so here's the thing, my brother had never seen any of the other versions, so I watched the Final Cut as well, and we'll talk about the versions in a minute here. Yeah. I watched the Final Cut with him, and he, as people do, I think, when they see Blade Runner for the first time, he didn't quite know what to think. He thought it was really interesting and beautiful and all these things, but I need to chew on that. And that's absolutely, when you see Blade Runner, build in an hour of meditation at the end, because you're going to need that, whether you've seen it once or 10 times. And so, but while he was thinking about that, because the ending of the movie, as I conceive of it, the director's cut, the final cut, the elevator door close, cue Vangelis, is such a powerful ending. And then I'm like, now Thomas, and I went and switched the discs and I said, let me show you how this ended in theaters in 1982. I said, see if you can spot the difference. And it's mostly the same. And then they get in the elevator and it cuts to a world that had no nature, no scenery, no like bright colors except the neon stuff.
Yeah.
Now we are in like Colorado and the mountains, and they're driving and there's sun on Deckard's face and he's narrating in his weird Texas drawl that he does not have in the movie proper about how not only are he and Rachel in forever love and they've gotten away, but that, oh, don't worry, Tyrell told me that he was lying about Rachel and she didn't have a 4-year lifespan, so she can live forever. We've got all the time in the world. Bye, kids. Bye. And if you think I'm exaggerating, only a little.
Yeah.
It is like, and Thomas was just like slack-jawed looking at this like, how did that come out? And I'm like, that's how they were able to get the movie out. It was a weird thing.
And it's one of those things where it's having like for the first version of the movie I ever saw was the director's cut version that has almost all that stuff is cut the fuck out of it.
Yeah.
It's like really hard to contextualize. How the fuck did anyone react to this movie when it came out? Because it must have been so obvious that there's like, because the core of Blade Runner is still in that theatrical cut, and so much of what is amazing about the movie still exists there.
Sure, yeah.
But then you just get this random like narration, and then you get this ending that is so counter against every single thematic argument the movie is making up to that point. Literally every single second of the movie is contradicting everything in that ending. How do you possibly respond to that? Like, I've never seen anything that has an ending that is just more out of fucking nowhere than the theatrical ending of Blade Runner.
And it's weird in so many ways because it's like this very happy ending, but the footage they use for it is stock footage from the opening to The Shining, the Stanley Kubrick movie. And so that is shot, from a helicopter in a way that is just, if you know that movie, it feels menacing. But this is not a menacing ending. Yeah. The Shining is a completely different aspect ratio. So like the video is like pulled and stretched and just looks awful. So like it's such a bizarre thing. Harrison Ford clearly wants to kill himself in the booth recording those lines. Sean Young looks confused, as she should have been in that scene, because what the hell are they filming?
Yeah.
The whole thing is just a clusterfuck. And I do think like the tinkering, it makes sense. Blade Runner kind of was dead on arrival when it came out. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't necessarily the biggest bomb in the world, but it didn't light the world on fire. It was kind of ignored. Critics didn't know what to make of it. And I think if that's what they leave you out of the theater with, I don't know what I'd make of it either.
Yeah.
Like, I feel very lucky that the version I saw was the director's cut, where it's, again, the elevator door closes, Vangelis comes up, and you have to think about what you just saw.
Yeah.
Because the theatrical cut of Blade Runner does not ask you to think at the end.
No, yeah. In fact, it's like very desperately like, don't think about this. Don't think about this. Just stop. Happy ending. Ha ha ha. Like, yay. I mean, it might as well have like the only thing that would have been more perfect is if the car that they were in drove up to a fucking church and they got out and got married. And that was the ending of it. It's like, yay, like Deckard and Replicant Lady get married, and yay, like wedding bells, and that's how it ends. Like it's a fucking Victorian novel.
I'm going to one-up it one more, and I'm going to say that the priest at the altar would be Roy Batty.
Yes.
And he was never dead, and he's their friend now.
Yeah, no, he's like, actually, yeah, no, like, I'm a bit, like, anemic or something, and I passed out. That's what happened. I'm totally fine. We're all cool. Also, Tyrell, that was, like, I just, like, had, like, red jam on my fingers. He's fine. Everyone's fine. Everyone's alive. Everyone gets married to all these other different characters, like the weird, like, dude who makes all the puppet people. Like, he gets married to the one robot lady. Like, it's all perfect.
But, okay, so we're talking around this, but let's talk about the versions, because it's an interesting thing, because Blade Runner is famous for all these different versions it has. It's really no more extreme, and I'd actually say it's less extreme than something like Star Wars, which has had how many versions now that really are transformative in all these different ways. Blade Runner, it's really, you can break it down into like two categories, basically. Yeah. But it became like 5 versions those are like the 5 canonized versions that we have on these box sets that you would buy now. You're going to get these 5 cuts of the movie. And so the first 2 are from 1982 when the movie came out, and that's the US theatrical cut and the international theatrical cut. The only difference is there's a couple added seconds of violence that had to be cut to get an R here in the US, and over in Europe they were like, yeah, poke those eyeballs right the fuck out.
Yeah.
Although I did learn, I was looking at this, the international cut was the one that came out here on VHS and later Laserdisc. So more people actually, by the time like the directors came out, were more familiar with that version.
Huh.
So those are the first two versions. And then in the early 90s, some theater in LA started showing, they had like accidentally gotten a print of what was the work print, which was just an early version of the film that Ridley Scott was, while they were cutting it, they kind of did this rough cut, and that's what they used for test screenings to gauge audience reaction. Apparently one of the cities that was shown in was Denver, I was reading about. That's kind of cool. And some theater in LA got that and was like, and it's a very different version of the movie. Other than one scene at the end, it doesn't have the narration, it doesn't have the happy ending. It's much closer to what we think of as Blade Runner now. And so this theater in LA was showing it as the director's cut of Blade Runner. And it was selling out, around the block. Every showtime they're having to add showtimes. It was a big deal, and it was like this big critical rediscovery of this film. But Ridley Scott realized what was happening was like, please stop showing that. It's got, like, one of the things about that is that it mostly does not have the finished score. The first few scenes do. The last hour is a lot of, like, sort of atmospheric Vangelis stuff, but clearly not finished cues. Like the saxophone love theme is not there at all, which you should watch the work print if for no other reason than the long scene with Rachel and Deckard that ends with them having sex, because it is 10 times more menacing without that saxophone. Anyway, and then the last half hour is all music from Jerry Goldsmith's score to, I think, Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Okay, well,
and it is very different. And a lot of the movie, like one of the things I'm going to say later about this movie is I don't think this movie works at all without Vangelis.
Yeah.
And you know that because the last half hour of the work print just kind of lays there, and it feels so awkward because that music is so important.
Yeah.
But then it's the ending that you kind of know from the director's cut. But anyway, Ridley Scott was like very uncomfortable with him showing like this, really. It would be like if someone took like a manuscript you wrote without the finished version and just gave it to someone. It'd be like, no, quit showing that. And so he was busy working on, I think, Thelma and Louise. But he gave Warner Brothers a bunch of notes, and they constructed what was called the director's cut. And that came out on, VHS, Laserdisc, later DVD, was the definitive version of the movie for many years. And per his instructions, they took out all the narration, they took out the happy ending, they made a couple little tweaks here and there, and they added this brief flash of a unicorn in this scene where Deckard is dreaming. But it wasn't Ridley Scott got to go in and hands-on finish the movie. So in 2007, well, this is actually a long process that started in 2001 and took forever. But 2007, we get the final cut, which is when Ridley Scott finally had time and Warner Brothers finally was willing to pony up the money for him to go in and like properly finish the movie. It's basically the director's cut with the international version violence added back in, with a lot of like little corrections to visual effects. Not like Star Wars Special Edition. You really won't notice a lot of them. They're very subtle, but just little things. There's a fun one. There's a scene in all the original versions where you're seeing Harrison Ford through a window while he's talking to this snake salesman. And in like the original versions, his lip sync does not match up with what he's saying in the slightest. And so what they did is they got Harrison Ford's son to say the actual lines, and they superimposed his face on Harrison Ford, and they even had to give him the makeup of Harrison Ford's chin scar, so it would work. And so they made just little things like that to make it work. They gave it a nice restoration and color timing pass. And it's the rare case where I think you can say like the director's 20 years later final cut, that really is the definitive best version of the movie. You can just trust like that's the one you should watch.
Yeah.
But the other ones are definitely interesting historical curiosities. I actually also watched some of the work print earlier today, and it is a fucking trip in parts. But yeah, so those are kind of the versions of Blade Runner. As you and I said, we both would have seen the director's cut, which was the definitive one for many, many years.
Yeah.
And now we've got the final cut, which is 10 years old this year, which is crazy. Yeah. But it is, and it's still very good. So yeah, I just wanted to go through that because it's an interesting production history. And yeah, as there are a lot of movies with multiple versions. Blade Runner is one of the most famous, but I also think when you break it down, it makes sense why there's all these versions. And I like that Ridley Scott, unlike say George Lucas, has always been willing to have them all out there.
Yeah,
it's a good thing because it really is like a little film class in a box when you get the Blade Runner set.
Yeah, because again, this is that kind of thing that you usually don't see multiple versions of the same movie, especially like because the director's cut and final cut versions, like the differences there are pretty subtle. But like, yeah, if you jump from the theatrical cut to the final cut, it's like, whoa,
yeah,
what the fuck?
Because the whole thing about the theatrical cut, we should say what's different about it is the studio imposed basically that the movie would have to have narration to kind of because there is a noirish element of Blade Runner. I think the studio really overplayed that with the narration because it's it's only so much of the noir thing. But they wanted to have Harrison Ford narrate parts of the movie so that you would understand more. So, for instance, when we first see Rick Deckard in the theatrical cut, he tells us all about how he had a wife, and she left him, and she's off-world, and all these things that you don't need to know. A lot of it is actually pulled from the Philip K. Dick book, but it's just not necessary to understand the movie. It's a lot of him explaining very obvious things. Because, when you watch Blade Runner now, I think one of the things that defines it for me is the silence. You usually will have the Vangelis score and some sound effects, but there's very little dialogue in the movie.
Yeah.
And the narration interrupts that. And then you have that happy ending at the end, which is ridiculous. You also have, Rutger Hauer's legendary speech about tears in the rain. And then it cuts to Harrison Ford. I don't know what he was thinking, but as he sat there dying, I realized, it's horrible.
Yeah, he's just trying to sort of moralize the movie to you in some weird way. You're like, what the fuck?
So, one of many times in Ridley Scott's career, up to and including Kingdom of Heaven, which got absolutely butchered in its theatrical cut by the studio, and also got a definitive director's cut a few years later, where Ridley Scott would make this Ridley Scott's most artistic movies were the ones that got the most fucked with. Uh-huh. Alien was unscathed.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how you would even change Alien. You could have Sigourney Weaver going, I don't know what the alien was thinking when he burst out of my friend's chest. But, yeah. Anyway, we did not get that. But, yeah. So, where do you want to take it next, Sean, now that we've talked about some of the history of the movie?
Let's just talk about the movie, man.
Let's talk about the movie.
Let's get into Blade Runner.
Fucking great movie. I mean, the opening shots of Blade Runner, you've got the eye cut to the cityscape, this big pyramid structure, these flaming oil towers, whatever they are, going off.
Los Angeles halfway through Trump's term.
2019.
Yep.
It is that's the thing. 10 years ago, I would watch Blade Runner and be like, we're not going to be there by 2019. Now I look at it yeah, we could be there.
Yeah, it's this is not that far off. This is disturbingly, sure, I could see this.
Anyway, so 2019, it's actually one of the interesting things in the work print that's most jarring is it doesn't have the eye stuff, which is so iconic. But you have these shots, and then it's, we're introduced to the idea of the replicants and this Voight Kampff test, which is one of the most wonderfully weird things in sci-fi movie history. But I always think, it is something that always, I think, grabs people, is Blade Runner has just one of the most confident, offbeat openings, and the Vangelis score is what makes it.
Yeah.
Because the visuals are great, but I think, and the visuals are, I shouldn't downplay it. The visuals of Blade Runner are all-timer great sci-fi visuals. I do think this is a movie that literally doesn't work without Vangelis. Uh-huh. It is as synesthetic a movie as exists. And what I mean by that is that the music sounds like the movie looks, and the movie looks like the music sounds. And it's there's this perfect textural link between the two, where when you have those opening weird synth chimes over that hellish Los Angeles cityscape, there's something that just clicks, and you are in that world. And I think more than anyone on the movie, Vangelis holds you there throughout.
Yeah, because it's something where so much of the experience of Blade Runner is about its sort of tone and aesthetic and the setting, and the music is the music, along with the amazing set design and special effects work, particularly for 1982. There's some really amazing special effects they do, but that music so gets that tone and puts you into that setting of this sort of neo-noir cyberpunk setting, of that it's this mix of this really heavy synth stuff that was pretty new for 1982 and is so crazy fucking influential, particularly for video game music.
Oh god.
Mass Effect sound, particularly for Mass Effect 1, that entire soundtrack is a mix of some sort of military themes for the human stuff, but it's mostly we really like the score for Blade Runner, so we just
I was talking about Super Metroid earlier on the SNES Classic. Playing that after rewatching Blade Runner, it's right, they got the visual aesthetic from Metroid from Alien, they got the sonic aesthetic from Blade Runner.
Yeah. So so that, but it has all that great sort of synth stuff mixed with the noir, kind of jazzy almost sort of stuff here and there. Particularly the romantic, quote unquote romantic scenes have that element there. That's sort of this mix of and sort of creating that sense of tone and aesthetic and setting. And that is the movie in so many ways, because it does have a plot, and the plot and characters are important to the movie in sort of communicating its themes. But it is so much about sort of bathing in this weird sort of future LA like mega city that has, this like sort of influx of all these different Asian cultures, predominantly like basically Japanese and Chinese cultures that have like radically transformed the city, and everyone feels like they're from 100 different places, and everywhere in the streets everyone's talking different languages to each other, and like everything feels isolated and weird and dirty and gross and grimy, and just contributes to that sense of like this very downtrodden future that Blade Runner is set in.
And because it's in the definitive versions of the movie, at least, there's very little in the way of formal exposition. There's an opening little title card about replicants.
Yeah.
But after that, there's no more exposition in like the director's cut or the final cut. It's all about just being in this world and kind of taking what, like, you'll see the blimp and like go to the off-world colonies.
Yeah.
And you realize, right, these are the people who were left behind. This is like the people who can't or won't get off of Earth, and it is just a hellhole. And it's the kind of thing, and that is also like a super influential sci-fi idea that everyone tries, and no one I think has done better in that sense. Like there's that really shitty Neil Blomkamp movie a couple years ago called Elysium,
right?
That made it a very heavy-handed and I think thematically confused illegal immigration story.
Right.
And it's like sometimes you just have to let the theme come from the aesthetics, and it's one of the things Blade Runner does beautifully. Is pretty much anything you can draw from this film is not said. It's felt, it's seen, it's glimpsed.
Yeah.
It's, Harrison Ford has lines in this movie, but his best acting is nonverbal. And, Harrison Ford has a great voice and a great physicality, but this is one that goes on more of the physicality side. And it's why we all can recite Roy Batty's speech at the end, because it's by far the most significant piece of dialogue in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is very much, it's just, and like the thing about it, because I think one of the things that struck me about it so much watching it now is that like, not to say that like Blade Runner is not the thing that originated cyberpunk. It was like part of like a set of things that sort of created that kind of cyberpunk genre, but particularly for as far as like the visuals go and that kind of like setting, Blade Runner so kind of codified what cyberpunk is. And what kind of struck me about watching it now is I feel like it reminded me of like cyberpunk is called cyberpunk for a reason, that it's like it's attached to a sort of like political philosophy, and it's not just about the aesthetic, and everything that people have taken from Blade Runner is so just the aesthetic component, and in a lot of ways forgot that like there's a like ideology that is attached to this that is punk. It is about this sense of, it's this very sort of like Marxist idea that you have the downtrodden people, and that's where you are for basically all of Blade Runner, and it is about how they're trying to sort of push out and how they're being oppressed by these larger forces and then trying to fight against it. Like that is what Blade Runner is about as a story and as a movie, and cyberpunk in so many ways I feel like is just kind of like lost that sense of itself, that is just about like the weird cool like Asian infused neon lights mega city thing, and forgets about all the sort of political dynamics that are supposed to be involved with that.
Yeah, and let's talk about the aesthetics, because they are absolutely astounding. And it was really cool for me, when I watched the movie recently, I was watching it with my brother, and like I said, he had tried to watch it before but didn't really make it through it. So this was effectively his first time seeing the movie. And there's something about sitting down with someone who hadn't seen it and showing it to them where you also see the visuals fresh. And there's things like when Deckard goes to the Tyrell Company and has the interview with Rachel and everything, and he is walking up to that big window, and there's the way the movie plays with light and color, and this weird, it's Art Deco, but it's also futuristic, and the shot, where the shutters close, down to all the stuff in the streets and the neon lights and all that, down to the place where J.F. Sebastian lives, which is, that could exist today. It's just a fucking broken down warehouse.
Yeah, it looks like that would be like from a Batman movie is where that dude lives.
Oh, Tim Burton absolutely got influence from this movie. And it's like all of that, there are so many different kinds of images that are truly jaw-dropping in this movie. And it's the kind of movie that you look at and you're like, I can't believe this is a live-action movie. This is the kind of stuff you get in animation. And you might not have said that in 1982, but cyberpunk has become so much, defined by, I think, how people use it in art and animation, not in live-action films like this. Yeah. It's a much harder thing to do. And it's one of the reasons why, for Blade Runner 2049, they've got fucking Roger Deakins on board to do the cinematography, because you cannot take this stuff lightly when you're working with a legacy of visuals like this. And if you look at the credits, it's all heavy hitters on the visual effects side. and it's just a lot of people working at the top of their game. And it is, part of it, I think, is it's so physical, it's so tangible, but it's also a pretty small movie. It's if you actually break it down into the number of scenes, not a lot of them. There's not a lot of things that happen in the movie, and there's not a lot of places they go, and that means that each set, each location is so lived in and so detailed, and you spend so much time there that you really, again, you just kind of bathe in this movie.
Yeah, and it's something that there's such a close attention to sort of like color palette and how the color palette affects each of the different scenes, because it is particularly the handful of scenes that are set in that Tyrell building have that like kind of like almost off-puttingly warm orange color that's like that, like because the scene and the sets are so sterile and big and almost like they feel like the end of Citizen Kane or something. It's just like these rooms is like, this room is like about 20 times bigger than it needs to be, and there's something so isolating about that sensation. But it has that like really soft warm orange sunlight that comes in, which is the only sunlight in the whole movie outside of the unicorn dream, basically.
Yeah.
It's like sunlight.
This movie almost uses color like an old silent movie with tinting. Yeah. Like, I was just watching The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari last night. One of the best movies ever made.
Fantastic movie.
And Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, if you've never seen it, one of the cool things, I mean, it's obviously its art design would have inspired something like Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Anything with a off-kilter art design was inspired by the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And one of the things that movie did is, as a lot of silent films did at the time, it tinted all the films. So, you know, they would color code it. So, you know, if you are in, for instance, the woman in that movie, when you're in her room, it's this pink tint, and it's like this pink angelic tint. When you're in, you know, the nighttime scenes and there's a murderer out, it's blue. And the scenes in with Caligari and his cabinet and Cesare are yellow.
Yeah.
And I think Blade Runner uses kind of a similar thing where it's straight up amber, and it almost feels tinted when you're in the Tyrell Corporation. And I think what that color reads over the course of the movie is really interesting, because like the last scene with Tyrell is basically played as a character ascending and meeting God, you know? And it's very powerful. And I think part of it is because that color scheme has been elevated above everything else. Because when you're down on the street, it's usually very dark or very blue. There's a lot of blue in there. Like there's literally all the stuff in the police station almost looks like it's got a blue tint over it. Or when you're in Deckard's apartment, it's just very raw, like, you know, blacks and browns. You know, and so everything has this kind of production design color code to it that means the movie sort of thematically is working on you with just the basics of how each, you know, area looks, beyond just, you know, when you go in and break down the frame and whatnot.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that when we talk about like how jarring the theatrical ending is that like there is no proper daylight in all of Blade Runner. Like all of it is like this dark nighttime city that is dirty and wet because it's constantly raining and everything is wet, and there's all these neon lights reflecting off of everything, and it's this kind of almost like harsh lighting in a lot of places when you're out in the city because of those bright neon colors. And when you're just out in like the sun with green and just like plants and life, that has such a different effect. And it's one of the things that's one of the reasons why the theatrical ending is so hard to sort of like see almost, is when it cuts to that. But it's one of the things that makes the unicorn dream in the middle of like the proper version of the movie stand out so much, because it also has that element. It's not like bright green because it's that kind of like misty, kind of like magical forest thing, but it is like nature, and you get this like one hit of nature right in the middle of this movie with the horse, or the unicorn horse, and like trees and grass and dirt, and outside of that it's all, you're just trapped in this mega city, and you never see anything outside of that space. It's
one of the things that I actually love about the final cut. A lot of the smaller changes are them kind of massaging those ideas aesthetically. Like the unicorn sequence, they really polished to make it look at home, but like the right kind of jarring, not the... Because the one in the director's cut is really... It clearly was not finished footage. And the other one is there's a shot, and you might not even remember that this is different if you've only seen the final cut recently. Near the end of the film, when Roy Batty dies and he lets go of the dove, it flies up. Yeah. And in all the cuts before the final cut, it's just a warehouse behind Elstree Studios, and so it's just these like two pipes, and there's a blue sky. Or like it might be nighttime, but it just looks like our world, you know. And what they did in the final cut is they basically took, like, matted out some of that and made, you know, put up the skyscrapers and everything, so it looks like that dove is flying into the darkness of the city. Yeah. And so it is still this thing of the dove is ascending, but it's not going into a different world. Yeah. And that's one of those changes in the final cut that actually I think is a really thematically on point one.
Yeah, and then the way that also like the white of the dove parallels the white of the unicorn, because white, in like actual white, is a very rare color in the color scheme as well. But it is just that it's that very close attention to the way that each scene looks and the way that the color communicates the mood of each scene, and the way that, like, I think that's one of the big things that contributes to that kind of like dreamlike sensation you were talking about at the top of this conversation, is that you are so confined in this like very like tight claustrophobic space, because you're always somewhere in this city. You never see anywhere outside of this city, and everything in the city has this very controlled, deliberate, sort of like man-made aesthetic and color to it. And it's something where like you don't think about it very often, because the vast majority of movies have some scene or something where you see just like normal life, and it like looks like it's basically reflective of what normal life looks like, with normal buildings and like normal trees, normal grass, normal animals, and you just don't get any of that in Blade Runner. And so you're so trapped in the city, and it's kind of almost like with Alien, but in Alien you're in a spaceship, so it kind of makes sense that you have to be confined here. Whereas in Blade Runner, there is presumably a world out there, and there are these other planets and colonies that people are going to, but you never get an actual window into any of that. And I think that's something that adds to that dreamlike sensation of that there's no logical reason why you have to be trapped, and yet you are aesthetically and sort of like philosophically and intellectually, you are contained in this space totally.
Absolutely. Ridley Scott, from the beginning of his career to now, one thing that I think has never wavered or changed is he's a real master of mise-en-scène.
Yeah.
And I actually think some of the least interesting moments in his career, like whatever that movie was in Iraq with Leonardo DiCaprio and Russell Crowe, are ones where like it's just sort of the normal world. And I don't think that's his most interesting mode, because I think he's so good at creating either other time periods, as in Gladiator or Kingdom of Heaven, or like other, versions of our world, like Alien, or I mean Alien is outer space, but Blade Runner is our world.
Yeah.
And like, Prometheus and Alien Covenant, you can knock them for some things, you can't knock the mise-en-scène.
Exactly.
Although even then, there's something about, and it's a prequel, so there's some justification for this, but there's something about how clean those movies look like, because now it's not easy to do any of that stuff, but it's a lot easier now to realize a vision like that than it was in 82. And there's something about the grit and the grime and the you can see the blood, sweat, and tears on the sets of Alien and Blade Runner.
And just, they look like spaces that you could walk into. Like, they look like that's one of the key things about the setting of Blade Runner, is that the set design and the direction and everything is so exacting that it feels like a city that you could just walk into.
Yep.
And it's in every single shot, it just feels that way. Every detail.
And we're on such a ground level perspective where it's Deckard's story intercut with some of the stuff with the replicants. We see Tyrell a couple of times, but always from the POV of, a plebeian, one of the replicants or Deckard.
Yeah, you're not just like cutting to him like in his skyscraper being like, ha 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 ha, I control the city.
No, it's so controlled that the movie also is very good about POV, which is that we never learn more than we should know. Yeah. Like, do we ever really figure out what all the snake stuff is about? No, we can kind of assume it's something about, go-go dancers and strippers in the year 2019 in Los Angeles dance with snakes. Sure. And some of the snakes are real and some of them are not. And if you read Philip K. Dick's book, there's more on some of those ideas. But like within the movie proper, you just kind of see these things as you're going along, and they don't get exposited to you. And I think all of that is something that makes the movie feel alive in a way a lot of movies don't. Which is that when I say Blade Runner feels alive, it's like you go into this movie and you're just seeing like 2 hour chunk of, edited time in these lives that are going on. And then you leave and you come back, if you want to. But like the world feels like it just goes on before and after it. Yeah. And that's something I think only the best sci-fi can really fully achieve.
Absolutely. And it's the kind of thing that, again, like looking at Ridley Scott's work on Alien, it's something that in these two movies he was so perfect at, is that they both suggest such a larger thing, the company in Alien, Tyrell, and the off-world colonies in Blade Runner. Like, it suggests at all these elements and these things, like the Voight-Kampff test, that it gives you just enough insight to be able to sort of like understand what it basically is, but you don't have the full insight to just like understand, like, you can't like read the encyclopedia entry on it. You just have this like impression of what it is.
And talking about the story, quote unquote, to talk about, I think it's worth spending. I think thematically is where we're going to get into more interesting stuff. But talking about that story, it is interesting because this is not a story where anything of particular consequence is achieved.
Uh-huh.
There's these 4 replicants. They might hurt a couple people, but probably not. They're the worst thing they do is kill Tyrell, I guess.
Yeah.
And other than that, they're just trying to figure things out. And if Deckard failed, they'd get another guy. And if he completely succeeds, great. He doesn't become healed as a person.
The other thing is if Deckard fails, they're all going to be dead in a couple of years.
Right. Yeah. It's all it's actually a fairly low stakes movie in a lot of ways. Near the end, Deckard is in some mortal peril.
Yeah.
But even the way the movie resolves its climax is so unconventional. With the choices Roy Batty makes in that final act, and that's why to me, that's one of the things that I think makes it good science fiction is that the story is secondary to the world. And I think a lot of the times that's something you need when you're doing an exercise in atmosphere and world building.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to forget that, I would say the same thing about Alien in a lot of ways too. It's the story is just the alien goes on a rampage.
Yeah.
And it's what you get out of that, learning about the company and how these characters move through these spaces. And I actually think if you can, that's one of the failings of a Prometheus or Alien Covenant to me is they are wall to wall jam packed with story.
Right.
And it's that's not the point. That's not, I'm not saying that can't work, but that's just not what this thing is at its best. And Blade Runner, I think, really is aware of that, whether that's on purpose or not. Because I think if you go into the history of this thing, there definitely were drafts of this script that were more heavy on the story, and there were definitely things that got cut as they went along. And there's a 45-minute assemblage of deleted scenes on the DVD that goes into different things. And the Philip K. Dick book is also fairly, low stakes and anecdotal, but it's a different kind of, it's a novel. There is more story to it. We'll have to talk about that. Have you ever read the Philip K. Dick book?
Yes, but that was a long time ago now.
We might have to talk about it a little bit later because it's a weird fucking book. Anyway, but yeah, so that's the story. But again, as we said, it's I think the ideas that come through this, because really what it is for me is it's about this journey, this character Deckard, I say takes, he doesn't take it willingly though.
Yeah.
This journey that is thrust upon him where by the end he has learned something about his conception of humanity. I think that's something we can all agree upon, right?
Yeah.
And then I think it's all degrees of what you take out of that. And I don't think it's a movie with one point of revelation. I think it's an ongoing thing. And I think, Deckard is in many ways also a proxy for the audience because, again, things are happening to Deckard. He isn't doing things. He isn't willingly going on a journey of self-discovery. He's a very reactive character. And so I think the movie is very much asking you to go along that journey with him and see what you take away from this discovery about humanity. And so this inevitably leads to the question, and I want to frame some of our conversation this way because it will get too many things.
Okay, yeah.
The question everyone likes to ask with Blade Runner is Deckard a replicant? Why is this? Because there are a couple of clues throughout the movie. Let's lay them out really quick.
Okay.
There's, visually, there's a couple things. He has a lot of pictures in his apartment, and the replicants all have pictures because that's how they retain memory.
Also, his pictures are really fucking weird because they're all these weird, they look like they're from the 19th century. And
they do.
Where did you get these pictures from, dude?
Well, and it's one of the things you might have to think about. Are those his? Did he? Because he also there's a moment where he pins the picture he got from one of the replicants with those, and it's are these all his? Yeah. Is this a trophy collection weird thing? So he's got those pictures. The replicants throughout the movie, and one of my favorite visual details, their eyes will do this weird glow thing in the camera, which is something eyes can do on camera, obviously, but it happens a lot with the replicants, and there's one shot where it very purposely happens to Deckard when he's with Rachel, and he's actually, it's very obscured because he's in the background and the focus is on Rachel, so he's a little blurred, but you can see it happen. So there's that, and then the biggest things are he has a dream about a unicorn, and at the end of the movie, the character played by Edward James Olmos has left an origami unicorn, and we know he has a habit of leaving origami animals at the houses of replicants. And so Deckard sees this, and it's
Yeah, was this an implanted memory? Because because you have that earlier scene with him and the Rachel character where he reveals that you're a replicant, and I can prove this to you because I saw these memories. These memories are not yours. They've been manufactured. And then also in that same scene, she asks him if he ever took the Voight-Kampff test, and he doesn't ever answer to that question.
Yeah.
Which I think is the first moment in the movie. If you're watching Blade Runner with no prior knowledge of what it is, I think that's the moment in the final cut where you're that opens that question for you of oh, he never answered that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ambiguity. There's no direct answer to this question. One of the things I'm very happy that I've heard about Blade Runner 2049 is it just ignores the question, which is the right way to go. So I want to ask, and we'll do the quick version of the answer now, and then we'll dive into the discussion.
Yeah.
Sean, is Deckard a replicant?
In my original reading of the movie, I would have said yes. Now, no, he's a human.
Yes, he's a human. That's my... But, okay, my answer is... It's a two-part answer. A, it doesn't matter, and B, he's a human.
Uh-huh.
And I think I actually... It's one of those... It's kind of like certain things people touch on in, like, when we talk about Twin Peaks or something, like, where is Audrey or something? And it's like...
Right.
Maybe the question is more of the point than this definitive answer.
Yeah.
Because to me, and this is something that has been an evolution in my thinking of Blade Runner... But I think in the reading I take with the movie now, the point of all those little clues and that ending, and one of Harrison Ford's best moments on film is when he takes the origami, he like smiles and starts nodding like this like means something to me.
It, yeah.
And he crumples it and gets in the elevator with purpose. And you can read a lot into that. But for me, it is everything he has experienced in the movie coming together and him realizing what I think I realize now, which is that it doesn't fucking matter. The point of this entire journey is that whether I'm a replicant or not, we are so similar. There is so much that links us. There's a reason why I have the shakes when I kill these things. There is a reason why I am so uncomfortable doing this job. There is a reason why I am connected to this Rachel person. There's a reason why Roy Batty's passing had this, impact on me. And that is because there are all these things that we're thinking are separating us and all these clues. And everything I've seen is all the things that ultimately make us the same, and that what this origami does is it puts the question in my head, and as long as I have the question, I have to live this life differently. And that's kind of how I view it. And then I think, like, logically he's a human. There's just a lot of things we could go into with that, but I also think, like, thematically it's more powerful. If he's just a replicant, he didn't actually learn anything.
Right.
If he's a human, he learned a lot of things. So that's kind of where I go from it.
Yeah, for me, it's like very similar. I think I take a slightly more, like, specifically like Marxist reading of it to like come to that conclusion, because it's not just he picks up the origami. It's also there's that line that Edward James Olmos says right after Roy Batty dies of like, it's a shame she's not going to live, but then again, who does? And then that line plays again in Deckard's head when he sees the origami. And for me, that like line is like, you can take that. And you can take the unicorn thing kind of one of two ways, if like depending on how you fall on the question, is he a replicant or is he human? And it's like, if he's a replicant, the answer to both of what it suggests is really boring. Of just like of the Edward James Olmos character says that line of that like but then again, who does as like a, but maybe you're a replicant and you're also going to die in a year or two or something, so maybe you should get on it. Like, and that's his hint. And then also he leaves the unicorn thing to be like, and tell him like, hey, you're a replicant, you should get out of here. That's like a really boring plot-based reason for all those things to happen in a movie that is not motivated primarily by plot. Whereas if you look at those things as the human thing, it's, she doesn't have much long to live, but then again, who does is like, we're all designed to die. Like, we're all going to die eventually, but then also in like that sort of like the larger sort of like social existence that we are provided for, we are designed to die. We are designed to be worn out and disposed of when we no longer serve our function, in the exact same way that the replicants do. That once Deckard can't perform his function as a Blade Runner, society has no need for him anymore, and they will kick him to the curb, and he will weaken and die, and that's it. That is his life. Like, you are part of this machine, that this larger sort of social machine, just as much as the replicants are. You are both programmed to die. You are both designed to wear out at some point. That is what you are. And then also the unicorn thing at the end is like, it's not just that unicorn thing is an implanted memory. It's that the reason why Edward James Olmos can leave this unicorn is because everybody in the city has the dream of the unicorn. Not necessarily, I think, in a literal way, but in the sense of like, everybody has this dream of being able to be this sort of like magical, like empowered creature that has power over itself, can guide itself, and lives in nature, and can sort of assert itself and its uniqueness and its individuality, which is kind of what that unicorn represents to me. But you actually, like, everyone has that dream of wanting that thing, but none of us are that thing. Like, none of us are that dove, none of us actually are that unicorn, because we are trapped by this city, we are trapped by these other forces, we are not just free. And Edward James Olmos can leave that unicorn for you because everybody is that way. Everybody thinks that way. Everybody wants to be that unique thing, but none of us actually are. And so all of us are trapped by those systems.
And I think when I talk about why the movie feels like a dream to me, it's because of how it uses some of these pieces of symbology.
Yeah.
Because I think if we were actually to sit down and take because I agree completely with everything you just said, but especially the part about, like, it's just a boring plot mechanic if he's a replicant.
Yeah.
But also, I don't think the movie is served well by making you ask those questions. Because if you go down that route of, like, then it's like, well, why did they build a replicant to hunt the replicants? Did they implant him with the, like, clinical depression that he got from hunting the replicants?
Why did they make him so fucking weak if he's supposed to be a replicant? Because he really gets his ass kicked all the time over the course of this movie.
Yeah, like, it just opens up more questions than it ultimately answers, and it's not satisfying to me if you walk down that path. But I think if you take it from this more dream logic thing, and I mean this not in the sense of, like, this is all the actual Rick Deckard sleeping in his bed having a dream about his own conception of humanity, but in the sense that cinema is a dream. Cinema has always had this connection from films made in the late 1800s to now.
Yeah, like it has, and not just cinema, any story does not have any obligation to try to project a, like, 100% accurate logical reality to you, because no story ever does.
And especially if you get into film theory and how much of that film theory is basically an offshoot of psychoanalysis and Freudian and Jungian dream analysis and stuff like that. Like, it really is. And you better believe Ridley Scott knows all of that, because he's, he's not quite a film brat in the same way like a Steven Spielberg is, but he's that same kind of generation, and they knew this stuff. And I think that does inform something like Blade Runner, where, there are recurring symbols through the movie that feel like, when you have a dream and you see something and it means something to you subconsciously, but it's not until, like, you wake up and start putting the pieces together that you can maybe start to see where that came from. But even then, it's never going to be 100% literal. Just like it doesn't really matter how Edward James Olmos knew how to leave him the unicorn. It's what that gesture means, which is what I think you were talking about, and that everyone has that view. Like, that stands in for so many other things. There's a reason it's a unicorn. If he's a replicant, the unicorn means nothing. It's just something they put in him,
Yeah. Which is, like, a really bizarre fabricated memory to provide someone. It's like, here's this, like, weird dream you had about a unicorn and a magic force. And
it's also, like, it's what I talked about earlier about the kind of fractal psyche there is in this movie, where, like, all of the Roy Batty scenes, like, the Roy and Deckard are only in the movie together at the very end, but all of their different actions they have very much play off one another. And of course, that's just good cinematic storytelling. That's thematic unity. But it also feels like the things Roy learns are in some way transferred over to Deckard through us, the audience, like the vision of, the dreamer, quote unquote. Like, I think the other most important scene of the movie thematically is Roy gets up the tower and he talks to Tyrell, and it's basically a meeting with God. And what happens in that meeting with God? It's, I want more life. Yeah. This is what I demand of you, my creator. And the creator just starts going down the list of reasons he cannot give more life. And that this is something you have to live with. This is the most horrible truth and most wonderful truth of existence, is that you have a limited amount of time and you have to make use of it. And Roy's only way to, reckon with that is to destroy his creator, because there is no absolution for him in this, if that's how he's viewing life. But then all of that material very much is transferred over, I think, to Deckard in the last part of the movie, and especially, once I think he has this internal realization near the end and when he sees the unicorn about exactly what you were talking about, and that all lives end, we are all disposable. This is something that, replicants and us, it's a trite thing to say in this kind of science fiction, but I think Blade Runner makes it meaningful. We're really no different in the ways that matter.
Yeah.
And, this is a new responsibility I have with this knowledge. And so it does feel like all the different things characters experience kind of snowball onto Deckard by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's good storytelling. It's oblique, not particularly like, plot-driven storytelling, but it's damn good storytelling.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things of the Roy Batty character in particular. It's just one of the things I love about the construction of the plot of the movie, is that it has this like faux neo-noir element of that. Like, that's like the surface level plot of the movie is very much that, like, there's been this murder, and the poor bedraggled cop gets dragged back in when he thought he was out. They drag him back in one last time, and he has to investigate this last case. And he's sort of investigating it, and then there's the femme fatale figure. Rachel's kind of a weird femme fatale figure, but she kind of stands in for that. I think there's a reason why she's a weird one. We'll talk about the Rachel stuff.
Yes.
But so it has all that stuff, and he's sort of following this mystery along, and that's one of the reasons that I think the studio originally wanted that voiceover, is to sort of forefront that stuff when that stuff's not interesting and is not supposed to be forefronted. Like, it's not supposed to be really fascinating that he finds this snake scale in the bathroom that leads him to the one lady.
It's really unglamorous detective work. Like, the biggest scene of detective work in the whole movie is him with that picture zoom-in device.
Enhance.
It's a great scene, and I love that you are just with him as he is intellectually working through these things, and you get this spark a couple times that, right, Deckard is probably actually pretty good at his job. He clearly has good instincts for all this, but also, like, what's the end result? As he figures out it's a snake skin, he looks at the picture as a snake scale, he has to go meet the snake person, and he finds this one woman who's like a stripper, and then he does this really bad impersonation of a journalist because he's not good with people, and he winds up just gunning her down in the street. Like, all of it leads to, like, really grimy, unsatisfying ends, which means you probably don't want to forefront the mystery too much. you know?
Like, it's not the Maltese Falcon or something where there's, like, this big grand conspiracy that he's sort of, like, unlocking as he goes along and all this stuff, and, like, you know, they don't drug him and kidnap him, and, you know, it's not that kind of thing, because there's so much else going on. It doesn't want to, nor need to, nor should it forefront this sort of, like, mystery detective story. But along the way, you're getting these, like, intercuts to Roy Batty, who's sort of, you know, his doppelganger in some ways, like, in the sort of, like, reverse journey that he's trying to follow him, while Roy Batty is trying to get to and find out how to get to Tyrell and sort of, like, get through that process. And in a lot of ways, the Roy Batty story is the one that's, like, that's the actual story that's going on. Like, he's the actual hero figure. You kind of talked about this earlier, that he's, in many ways, he's the actual protagonist of the story. And you could see a much, like, a different movie, him literally being just the protagonist, and that's what the story is. And, like, this Rick Deckard character doesn't play into it at all. And I feel like that is kind of what a lot of some of the more modern kind of, like, Android storyline stuff, that's kind of like what Westworld turns into in a lot of ways, is it is, like, literally the robot is just the protagonist character and sort of, like, on that pursuit to meet their creator, and you are just there with them, and that's all it is. But there's something so much more interesting to me about it, of, like, it being like conveyed to you in this very fractured sense of, you kind of, like, are interrupted by it every now and again, and you're never in the moment with it. You're never, like, quite sure what Roy Batty knows, where he is, where he's going, because you're away from him for so long when you're with Deckard, that when he enters the story again, he's at a totally different point in his journey. And there's something really fascinating about that to me.
It is like, you know, it is something I realize every time I watch the movie, how kind of tight and compact the film is. It breathes and it lingers and it's very slow. But again, if you, like, count the number of scenes, it moves with a lot of purpose. You know, like, Deckard and Rachel have, I think, 3 scenes together before they escape at the end. So, like, 4 total. And, you know, Roy only has 4 or 5 scenes, you know, including the Tyrell stuff, before we get to the final confrontation. And, you know, so every character is only there for a little bit, but they become these kind of living, breathing vignettes. Like, one of, I think, the most interesting parts of the movie, and ironically somewhat, the part that is drawn most cleanly from the Philip K. Dick book, is the stuff with J.F. Sebastian.
Yeah.
And this little vignette about this guy who is not a replicant, he's not a cop, he's just this guy who, you know, builds puppets and shit, and, like, helps design the androids. And the replicants basically, you know, take use of his, you know, downtroddenness to get what they need. And he is ultimately also thrown away, which says probably a million different things. But I think that's a whole part of the movie that is just kind of aching and interesting, and only intersects in a plot sense in a pretty clear way near the end. But it often just feels like its own thing, but it also feels very important to the text of the movie.
Yeah, because that's also one of the areas where I think, like, the dream logic is most at work, because, like, the way that character enters the story is so weird, because you have the one replicant lady who's Prim, who, like, is on the streets and alone, and she's trying to, like, sleep in some garbage because she's basically homeless, and then he's coming into his apartment, and kind of, like, they stumble upon each other, and then she freaks out, and he freaks out, and then he invites her up, and you then later figure out that, oh, this is the guy that Roy Batty was, like, just found out he needs to go after earlier in the movie. And it's a very, in one sense, you can, like, if you wanted to, you could criticize it as being a very convenient plotting, but it's also more, I think it is about that, like, weird dream sense of that things are intersecting in ways that they shouldn't in a, like, logical, reasonable world. Like, it's an insane coincidence that just happens, but it works in the flow of the movie.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. And the character I was talking about in the book is something Isidore. It's like R.F. Isidore becomes J.F. Sebastian in the movie. I'm not quite sure why that name change happened because it's the exact same format. But that is a part that is actually pretty close to the Philip K. Dick. And actually, talking about the Philip K. Dick book, which is very much about, as a lot of Dick's books are actually about, they're a lot more mundane than their film adaptations would become.
Yeah.
And the Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is very much about this like mundane darkness of this day-to-day existence in this broken world. And part of that is through that Isidore character. And I think J.F. Sebastian is probably the clearest that they like take a very Philip K. Dick feeling, which is like this guy living alone, and he has these friends he makes, and Prim meets him. That like feels very true to a lot of the spirit of the book. Whereas all the characters in the book kind of feel like J.F. Sebastian in that they are just sort of pathetic. Mm-hmm. Like Deckard in the book, his only real dream is he wants to make enough money that he can get a real goat, I think, or a real sheep.
Yeah, because that's one of the bigger sort of like forefronted things in the book that I remember is that it's more about like most animals have gone extinct or are mostly extinct. And so you have like the electric sheep part of that title is a little bit more literal than you think.
Yes. No, it's literally like, this is what we long for, is that I have a fake sheep or something and I just want to get a real one for me and my wife. And the end of the book is that he does get one and then it gets shot. And it's like, it's a real downtrodden ending and very sad. But like, the movie obviously ditches all of that stuff, which I don't think you could. I actually would recommend the book. It's a very interesting piece of writing. They could never have made a straight movie adaptation of that.
Yeah.
So, but it's honestly, it's kind of like Stanley Kubrick and The Shining. I think the people who made Blade Runner saw something in that book they latched onto, but I don't think it was the book itself. Right, just like it's like Stanley Kubrick clearly has no real love for the Stephen King Shining book, but he saw something and he ran with it. And I think actually some of the best adaptations are made that way. So
yeah, that whatever, there's some like core idea or concept that exists in it that sparks that idea in the creators that then they go and like sort of off on a tangent from that, like, because there are like connections thematically between Blade Runner and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but it definitely has gone in its own direction from that kind of starting point.
Yeah. And if you watch like the making of documentary on the set, which I forgot is a full 3.5 hours long, one of the early things is Hampton Fancher, the co-writer of Blade Runner, even says like, I read this Philip K. Dick book and I really didn't like it, but I wanted to, and he like goes off, and it's hilarious to just hear them say like, I didn't like the source material, but I wanted to make a movie based on it, and that may sound counterintuitive, but it actually makes complete sense when you break it down. So let's talk about the Rachel stuff.
Okay, yeah.
It is one of the hardest things in the movie to break down, even though I think everyone would pretty much agree it's a very striking part of the film. Like, Sean Young, it's a really interesting performance.
Yeah.
And I think a one that, like, I think you could read it as, like, there's something wooden going on there. I think it's very intentional, and I think it's very calculated, and I think it's a really good performance. And her chemistry with Harrison Ford and vice versa is like the weirdest movie chemistry I can think of. But it also feels in some way intentional to me.
Yeah, but it's one of the things with like the Rachel stuff of where the movie in some ways feels dated, but I think there's also something about like, there's something in like those romance scenes are like start out very cheesy and then get very dark in a way that like sometimes I have a hard time when I watch this movie like gauging how much did they realize like how fucked up a lot of like this scene is, like when they have sex. Like it is really like an intense example of like sexual assault. It's like strikingly intense to me, even though it's not like, it's not sort of gimmick intense in a gimmick sense of like trying to like, be like super explicit about everything. But but the way that the scene progresses is he is so forceful and like on the point of direct violence, but never quite there to basically like induce the sexual encounter in a way that is not like properly consensual.
And I think if you asked Hampton Fancher, Ridley Scott, Sean Young, and Harrison Ford all to give you their read on that scene, I think every one of them would give you a different read.
Yeah.
And I think if you asked the film's editor and cinematographer, I think everyone would have a different read on that scene. And I think that's part of what makes it an interesting scene is I don't think there was necessarily a clear goal with that scene in terms other than that they have to fuck at this point, and how and if you look at the deleted scenes for this part of the movie, it's actually really interesting because the version they shot was way more explicit and exploitational, because you have like she gets topless and he's fondling her and it goes on longer, and it's not so much about this like the version in the final film, and it's not really different between the different cuts. It's really like this old-fashioned noir. It's the most like noirish moment in the movie.
It's so like 40s, 50s Hollywood.
Yes, it's very 40s, 50s Hollywood, and like to the point where like it disturbs you to see Harrison Ford doing this, because this is a little different than how he usually is.
Yeah.
He's more of a striking romantic hero. Like, there's a little bit of that in Indiana Jones, the first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark, I guess, but they never make it that explicit. But like, it's the grabbing the shoulders, it's the violent kisses, it's those sorts of things. And I do think they made the right decisions in how they edited the scene, if you look at, what was left on the cutting room floor. But it is interesting because I think the whole the dynamics of that scene, because it's a really long sequence from when she comes back to his apartment to when they're kissing. And there's a lot of ups and downs. He is drunk and he offers her a drink, and he's really sad and he's having the shakes because she's just shot one of the replicants.
Leon.
And he's telling her about how he always gets the shakes, and he passes out at one point, and they're sitting together, and then she goes and starts playing the piano, and throughout all this you have the Vangelis love theme coming in and out, and it's dancing across the top of the scene in really interesting ways. And then they reach this kind of breaking point where they were flirting, and she decides, I don't feel good about this, and tries to leave, and he says no and pushes her back. That's the detail I forgot, is that he physically pushes her back against the wall, goes in, kisses her, comes back out and says, like, now you kiss me. And she says, like, no. And he says, say it. And she goes, kiss me. And then they come in and they start kissing, and then we cut away.
Yeah.
And it's also one of the reasons why, if in the theatrical cut, when they just flat out, it's like, we love each other, and how many days are we going to have? It's like, that's a misreading of this scene.
Yeah, like, that makes the scene really bad, is if you have the original ending. But, like, it's something where, again, I find it hard to sort of, like, gauge what the artistic intent necessarily is with it, but like my sort of reading and like takeaway from it this time was this, like, Deckard's not a good person. Like, no. He's an anti-hero, like, and he's not, like, he learns a lesson over the course of the movie, but there's definitely this sort of like open question to me of like, what is his relationship with Rachel and who is she, and like how shut down is she by this point because she knows she's a replicant.
And how much of his actions are fueled by she's just a fuckbot.
Yeah, that she's not a person to him. And maybe she's not even a person to herself. It's kind of like the part that I like was a part of the scene I didn't really read in before, and this time that's what it kind of felt like to me.
And that's why I think that sequence, and viewed in its full context, works, is it is this push and pull in the dynamic between each other and within themselves of how much humanity they are showing to the other, how much they are hiding, and in what moments they are throwing it aside. And the weird thing about that, and the point they reach at the end is sex, which is a very human thing.
Yeah.
But they've gotten to it through a pretty inhuman, stretch of actions at that point.
Well, it's just something where, like, the second that he slams that door shut when she tries to leave, she has no agency anymore. No. Like, for the whole rest of the story, every line that she says is prompted by him in some way. Yes. Every action she takes is prompted by him in some way. She loses any agency. Like, literally all of her agency is gone the second that happens.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you don't know what to think of it, a little bit. But it's also, it definitely feels like the Rachel stuff feels like a part of the movie that became what it was very much on accident.
Yeah.
And yet, it's a very important part of the movie. I don't think you can say it doesn't work. I think you can say it's problematic, and it is in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important thematically to how this, goes down.
Yeah, I agree that it's like a scene that's one of the sequences of the movie that has changed the most for me.
Yeah.
From the first time I watched it.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why we're talking about the sequel. Which, this is something we have to... Are we calling Blade Runner 2049 a sequel? Is it a sequel if it comes out 37 years late? I don't know.
I don't know. It's kind of also, like, since I don't know what it's...
Right.
How deep its connection is to Blade Runner. Because, again, like, if it's not addressing the replicant human question. But, like, if Harrison Ford is there at all, it is addressing that. It has to address that question because he can't be a replicant then.
Yeah. But like, I was just, it's kind of like, I think the default word for it is a sequel. I'm kind of, until I see it, I'm also thinking of it as almost like a sister film kind of thing. But we'll see. But, like, it is something that I've heard really good things about the Harrison Ford parts of the movie. It sounds like another movie where Harrison Ford has brought his A game, which is awesome. I love that he's doing this. But, like, I think that actually there's a lot of interesting stuff you could do with like Rick Deckard 40 years later. You know, would he have anything? What would he be? Like, I actually think there's some interesting questions you could ask, and I think they've made the right choice. He's not the main character of this movie. By all accounts, he's, you know, you have to get pretty deep in the movie before he even shows up. So, like, but I think a lot of the things that happen in the first Blade Runner that are very much unresolved are what make those questions interesting, you know?
Yeah. It's like, what is that relationship going forward? Because it does have such a striking ending. Like, I had forgotten, like, I remembered the unicorn thing, but I had forgotten that, like, they get in the elevator, and as soon as the elevator doors close, that's when it goes to credits. I had forgotten that that's how, like, the last thing
that feels like a proper modernist, like, ending.
Yeah.
You'd like, movies of that period don't end that cleanly a lot of the time, you know?
Because it's the kind of thing of where... and part of it is that, like, now that I know that they have made another Blade Runner movie, you see that and you're like, oh, that actually... if this movie had been more successful when it came out, like, in its theater, like, box office, they would have, like, I don't know if Ridley Scott would have ever made another Blade Runner movie. They would have gotten somebody make a fucking Blade Runner 2 movie, because that is so, like, I don't think it is open in a, like, thematic sense necessarily, but in terms of, like, the momentum of the scene, it sort of stops so suddenly in this upswing in a way that is this sort of, like, more kind of, like, modern feel to it, that you're like, oh, that's, like... There would have been some producer if this movie had been a little bit more successful that would have jumped on that moment and be like, sequel. We have to do a sequel because it's open-ended enough. Obviously, the movie didn't even have that ending when it actually came out, but
it's a great ending. It's such a perfect ending. And like, I remember, and I think everyone probably has this reaction if that's the version you first saw. When I saw this movie for the first time and I had like rented the disc from Netflix, I watched the movie, I was kind of confused by it. I was a little like, not what I expected, but I was enjoying, you know, what I was seeing in it, but I didn't quite know what to make of it. And then that elevator door shuts and Vangelis comes on, and you're just kind of blown to the back of your seat, and you're like, oh, I'm not sure what I just saw, but that was powerful. You know, it's a punch of an ending that it like the weight of the movie comes down on you all at once. And I saw it happen to Thomas, my brother, when we watched it. It was the same kind of thing. Like, not that he was disliking the movie, just I do think it's a really hard movie to know what to make of the first time you see it.
Yeah.
And then you get to that ending, and whether you can put it into words or not, that's when you're like, this worked. Whether or not I know how it worked, this works.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's a big reason why it didn't work in theaters for people in 1982, because there is no punch to the end of the movie. And the movie, essentially, it gets a plot resolution and no thematic resolution. You know, it reverses itself. And the movie's plot isn't important enough to get that kind of resolution. So, it's yeah. So what else? I think we've exhausted a lot of things. There's a million things you could talk about with this movie, but what else should we touch upon before we call it a day?
I mean, I feel like we are sort of contractually obligated in some ways to have to talk about the Roy Batty scene, the monologue at the end.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Like, we have to talk about that.
We touched on it, but yeah. Okay, the entire, like, I always forget how long a sequence it is.
Me too. I was very surprised that, like, oh, right, this is a sustained action sequence, like, because you mostly remember the conclusion of it.
Yeah, but it's a long scene with him. First, he gets in the building and he fights Prim, and he shoots Prim, and it's one of the most brutal moments. It is, I think, the most brutal moment in the movie is her, like, flailing on the floor.
Yeah, and he has to shoot her a couple more times before she stops.
Yeah. Daryl Hannah, who we should mention.
Yeah.
This was, like, I think one of her first movies. She's great in this. And you can see why Quentin Tarantino cast her in, like, Kill Bill and other things. Yeah. Like, just, she's got a real interesting presence and wears that makeup very interestingly, and the physicality of it is great. But yeah, you have all of that, and then Roy comes in, and that's where the movie feels like a nightmare to me, where it is, he's moving through, like, this haunted warehouse, and Roy, to Rick, from his, like, point of view, is like this larger-than-life figure who is moving through the walls and yelling out these weird things, and Roy Batty is, like, becoming his own, like, legend in the walls, like, you know, because he's doing like these like the fair like nursery rhyme things to Deckard, and he's howling, and he shoves a nail through his hand.
He like rips his shirt off and is just like running around like a madman.
It's, I mean, before we even get to the scene, Rutger Hauer in this movie, it's a touchstone for a great sci-fi performance. It is one of the best performances in the history of this genre.
Yeah.
It's one of the very few films from this period where I think Harrison Ford is outshined. Where Harrison Ford was the lead, and Harrison Ford, Blade Runner is one of his best performances. The movie belongs to Rutger Hauer.
Oh, yeah, because it's also just the character of Roy Batty has such an interesting progression where he starts out at the beginning of the movie being so contained and intelligent, and he's, you know, every action he makes is so deliberate, and then over the course of the movie, especially like, once you know where the plot goes and you know that he's almost at the end of his lifespan, and he doesn't necessarily know that directly because that's one of the things you assume he's going for Tyrell for, and then at some point you realize, oh, he knows, and he starts sweating more, and he gets more frantic, he gets more hasty, especially in that, like, after the meeting with Tyrell, and then by this point, when he is the last replicant of his group left, he snaps and he goes utterly feral. He sort of becomes non-human, basically, in those moments, up until the ending when he sort of, like, puts his, like, humanity on again to save Deckard. But he just, like, totally lets it go and just, like, howling at the moon, basically.
And it's such a weird climax because, to that point, this is Deckard fighting someone he is in no way prepared to fight. At any moment, Roy could end the fight and just rip his head off or something.
Yeah.
And the end of the climax of the movie is Deckard hanging by, one hand on this, there's even a point before that climax where Roy has him, breaks 2 fingers, and then gives him his gun back. Yeah. He's just toying with him. This is not a climax where, like, the hero has any real agency or say in things. It's completely, he's the plaything of this character, and then it comes to, by no even real fault of Deckard has made a bad jump. He's gonna fall to his death, and Roy decides, well, you know what? There's no real point in me killing this guy. My time is up. Let's do something about this. And he makes the big leap, and he saves Deckard. And again, it's like this is like a 25-minute action sequence. For most of it, our hero, Rick Deckard, is not like an active participant other than he's reacting to the stuff Batty is throwing at him.
Yeah, and he's just running away. And it's one of the reasons why I don't like seeing the movie as him being a replicant, is because it removes that vulnerability there. That is like, he's so utterly vulnerable in a way that, like, Harrison Ford often isn't. Like, he's definitely has a bit of that, like, he's not Superman in Indiana Jones or something, but in Indiana Jones and the Star Wars, he's way more in command of himself and is like, a much more sort of like action hero kind of character, whereas here he's only an action hero in a couple of moments when he shoots people with the gun, but he's even reluctant to do that most of the time. And then in this sequence, when he loses his gun, he's utterly powerless, and he's just running away without any, like, way to escape, actually, because he's going up to the roof of the building, and the whole time you're like, you're not going to get away from him that way, dude. Like, the only hope you have is to get into a car and drive the fuck out of here, and there's no car on the roof.
So the entire ending is contingent on Roy making the choice to save Deckard.
Yeah.
He does, and then we get the speech.
Yeah.
So, and I want to read the speech, and then I also want to look at the production of this, because it's a really interesting story how this was put together.
Right.
But it's only a couple of lines, and I should say, the Tears in the Rain monologue has its own Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, I went onto the Wikipedia page after I watched Blade Runner to sort of refresh on some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and I laughed really hard when I saw that.
But it deserves it.
Yeah.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die. And Rutger Hauer delivers it perfectly. You always forget it's 4 lines.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that he draws it out, it's you just feel the character live. It doesn't feel like something someone wrote. It feels like something Roy Batty in the moment is saying extemporaneously, know? And then he dies, and the dove goes away, and Deckard kind of looks at him, and in other cuts, there's some really bad narration that ruins the moment.
Yeah.
Including in the work print version, that's the only line of narration there, and it's kind of interesting because there's this whole thing about, like, it took him all night to die. It's like his body didn't want to leave, but he enjoyed it all, even the pain. He enjoyed life. It's not good. It's better than what's in the theatrical cut. But yeah, so you have all of that, and the dove goes away, and then you have another moment that feels incredibly dreamlike to me is Deckard is sitting there, and then Edward James Olmos comes up and says, "You've done a man's work." And it's like, well, how did you know he just did this? Like, Deckard actually didn't really do that. The Roy Batty just died. It's the whole thing is so weird and surreal.
I mean, Edward James Olmos' whole role in the movie is just like this weird dream figure. Like, I mean, he comes into the movie talking utter gibberish.
Yes.
Which I thought it was really funny because this is the first time I've watched Blade Runner since I learned how to speak Japanese. And so in that scene where he's at the bar that Edward James Olmos comes in for the first time, he's ordering a drinks from this Japanese bartender who keeps on saying, "Futatsu wa jubun desu yo," which is like, 2 is enough. And Harrison Ford's like, "I want 4. No, 2 is enough." And then Edward James Olmos comes in, speaks utter gibberish that is not Japanese at all. And Harrison Ford looks at the Japanese dude, is like, "What did he say?" And the Japanese dude translates for him. It's like, what?
They're kind of trying to do what like Firefly would later do, where it's like this mix of like Asian, dialects and languages, which you really couldn't do because Asian languages are not similar. That's a very Western way of looking at that. But yeah, I actually kind of like that it's just utter gibberishy speaking, and they didn't try to.
I think it's intentional because I mean, like the other snippets of like actual Asian language are all basically correct.
Yes.
So it's like him speaking this like nonsense dialogue is part of like the weird mystique of that character.
Yeah.
That then like, the last time he shows up in the movie, like he's like, he just shows up out of nowhere. His car just lands on the roof. He comes out and, "You did a man's work, Deckard. It's a shame she's not going to live, but then again, who does?" And then he's just, that's when you're like, who the fuck are you? Who is this guy? If anyone's a replicant, it's that fucking dude. Because he's not human, that's for sure.
It's great. But back to the Rutger Hauer speech.
Yeah.
One of the great things about this monologue is everyone on the movie will tell you that Rutger Hauer basically wrote it. That on the day of, they didn't really like how the line, it was too long, and Rutger Hauer's like, "Let me try something," and kind of cut it down and reworked it, and they all are in awe of what he did with this, even, the writers in the movie. There's not like an ego hit to them. It's like, just look at how good that was. The original version in the script is this: "I have known adventures, seen places you people will never see. I've been off-world and back. Frontiers. I've stood on the back deck of a blinker bound for the Plution camps with sweat in my eyes, watching the stars fight on the shoulder of Orion. I felt wind in my hair, riding test boats off the black galaxies and seen an attack fleet burn like a match and disappear. I've seen it, felt it." That's an interesting piece of writing. It's completely wrong for the movie that is Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that this movie like happened by fucking accident. That that was in the script. That's a different tone. That is a different movie. And Rutger Hauer was just at one enough with this character. They said, "Let me give it a try." And basically, there's a couple of things that are similar in there, but he made it feel startlingly human. In a weird way.
It's like, because it's so simple, it's so to the point, and then that last line of, like tears in rain is such a, like, I mean, that's the fucking thesis of the movie to me, basically, is that, like, you are, like, all of these people and all these memories, all these experiences, all the lives that all these people lead, at the end of the day, all those experiences will be lost like tears in rain. They'll be lost because you're in this mess of humanity, and you are lost in this mess of humanity. And once it's gone, it's just gone.
And it's amazing because, like, and there is some disagreement. Like, Rutger Hauer is more humble about his role in it. He says, "Oh, I just cut it down and then I added the tears in the rain line." But that's the one thing everyone agrees on, is that tears in rain was Rutger Hauer. Yeah. And it's hard to imagine that anyone went into making this movie without that line. Because, as you say, it feels like the thesis. It feels like it ties together not just every theme, but the aesthetics of the film. Like, It's been raining the whole time, and then we get this scene that puts, like, this little punctuation point on that aesthetic motif.
Yeah, and then it cuts back to Harrison Ford as he's like watching all this happen, and he's dripping wet, like drenched in rain, and it is the kind of thing that, like, I don't think Harrison Ford would, like, I don't even know if this was something they were trying to do, of like make him look like he was crying, but because you wouldn't be able to tell if he was crying in this moment of like this moment of beauty and this human connection he has with this person he's been chasing all this time. You would understand someone crying, but even if he was, you wouldn't be able to tell.
It is just a remarkable moment in film history. Yeah. And I said that Blade Runner doesn't work without the Vangelis score. It sure as shit doesn't work without that scene. Yeah. That is you remove that scene, the movie falls apart in some weird way. Like, you'd have a lot of the good stuff, but I think it's such a linchpin. And it is such a beautiful moment. And that scene alone is enough of a legacy for Rutger Hauer. And he's going to do so many cool things. Yeah. Whenever Rutger Hauer shows up in something, I'm happy. He's a great actor. But, like, those words will be on his tombstone, and they will be an incredible legacy. Yeah. But yeah, and that's probably as good a place as any to start wrapping things up, I think. Yeah. I mean, any other last thoughts on Blade Runner?
It's such a good movie, man. Like, it's something where, again, it was like, is a thing of like watching it again. I felt like I took this movie for granted and how good this movie was for granted, and I should have revisited it earlier. Because it's a mark of a fantastic piece of art when you have that much distance from it and you revisit it. And like I said, the first time I watched that movie, I was basically like, of course he's a replicant. Like, how else could you ever possibly read this? Like, he has to be a replicant. That's the only thing that makes sense. And now my understanding, because it's part of like my understanding of what movies can be and like what they can communicate, has so evolved since I was like fucking 16 or 15 or whatever. It's a testament to the quality of the movie that it can change. My reaction to it can change so drastically in what is, relatively speaking, a small amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a film that has had an inordinate amount of influence. Like, just especially for a movie that, you know, at the time kind of landed with a thud on audiences in 1982. And I think it obviously has impacted aesthetics in all over the world in film and animation and video games. Music, all these different things. And yet you go back to it and there is nothing quite like the specific alchemical mixture that is Blade Runner.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think Blade Runner 2049 will quite be that either. And that's a good thing. I hope, Denis Villeneuve and everyone didn't go in saying, we're going to make Blade Runner 2.
Right.
It's got to be, and that's from everything I've heard, it is its own, it is a weird artistic thing, but it's a different weird artistic thing. And that's what I want. To me, if you're going to do more Blade Runner, which is fine, I think you've got to just take it and whatever artistic thing in it ignites in you, that material, that's what you should chase. And I hope that's what they've done. And I am more excited for this sequel than I've been for a lot of sequels, even to things that would seem like more obvious ideas. But I don't know. The Roger Deakins doing a Blade Runner movie is amazing. Yeah. Denis Villeneuve is a really talented filmmaker. I like the cast. I like what I'm hearing from the reviews, including a lot of people critics I follow who I love, who were very skeptical of a Blade Runner sequel, who then loved it. It's just like, I'm excited. And it's kind of interesting because Blade Runner 2049, it's also come out, the movie's like 3 hours long. Uh-huh. And the thing is, I can easily imagine a 3 hour like Blade Runner because...
Like, if you told me that Blade Runner was 3 hours long when I had like before I had rewatched the movie, I would kind of be like, I thought it was a little shorter than that, but I would basically believe, like, you could convince me that Blade Runner was 3 hours long if I hadn't seen the movie recently.
Yeah, and it's a pretty svelte, 117 minutes, and even though there's all these different versions, they're all pretty much the same length because it's not about big deleted or extended scenes. It's about these little tonal things and what's layered on top. So yeah, I'm excited to see the movie next week and talk about it, and I don't know. It's one of those movies that I'm very excited to see on the big screen.
Yeah, me too.
It's actually, Blade Runner is one of the few movies from this era that I love that I've never gotten to see in a theater. It doesn't actually show in theaters all that much. Mm-hmm. Raiders of the Lost Ark will show at an area theater 5 times a year, and I've seen it multiple times a year in some years. But Blade Runner doesn't, in part I think because of all the versions. We do have a standardized version now, but certainly during the years when we would have still been showing movies on 35 millimeter, I don't even know if there would have still been prints of it, especially because if a movie didn't really succeed in its time, they wouldn't have kept a lot of the prints around. So anyway, I'm rambling, but I love this movie.
It's an unbelievable movie. The thing I'm really excited about is if the sequel is very good and very successful, that means we get to basically have the Ridley Scott's version of Prometheus, but now for Blade Runner.
What would that be?
I don't know, but I think that's where we're heading. I think that's our future is now. We're bringing Terminator back with, again. Oh,
God.
Alien has been back twice now. Now it's Blade Runner's turn. It never got it's requisite weird spin-off sequel bullshit. And it sounds like this movie's going to be good, but will the next one be good?
Probably not.
Probably not.